4 minutes after 10 is the time. I changed my mind. I do that sometimes, listening to the news. You know that I approach the situation in Gaza with a leaden foot and a heavy heart, because I am conscious, of course I am, and so are you, of how horrible and harrowing it is for anybody with an investment in the area, let alone for anybody with a genuine investment in humanity. And yet I think we have a responsibility today to return to the territory, precisely because of the cessation of that ceasefire. Hamas reportedly letting some rockets fly in the direction of Israel, and Israel responding by recommencing the bombardment of that benighted corner of the planet. And I am going to ask you how you think it's going to end, how you think the culmination will unfold. I'll tell you what I think, and I don't even know that I'm going to introduce a moral dimension to this in the first instance. I just think that you have now a situation where Netanyahu's domestic plight, and I think that's the right word to use, is at least as relevant to Israel's policy as the grim terror attack by Hamas of October the 7th. And the international fatigue, if that's the right word, seems to be setting in. By that I mean that the people calling loudly for a ceasefire or a longer humanitarian pause or perhaps a slightly more honest conversation have been closed down in the British and most of the American media. And that means that for all the talk from Biden's White House of wanting to see longer ceasefires and more humanitarian aid, I think that the Israeli government is in possession really of a free pass now on doing whatever it wants to do to the Gaza Strip. There's an extraordinary cartoon by Peter Brooks in the Times today, which has Benjamin Netanyahu addressing a portrait of Henry Kissinger, in which he says something like, well, I should really give you the full cartoon, shouldn't I, instead of trying to do it from memory. So there's a portrait representing Henry Kissinger, who of course died yesterday, I think best described as a divisive figure in international politics. And Peter Brooks picks up on some of his best-known policy interventions, shall we say, and has Benjamin Netanyahu looking at the portrait of Kissinger and saying, I learned a lot from you. And Kissinger replies, or rather he says, you taught me all I know. To which Kissinger replies, about diplomacy, ? And Netanyahu says, no, bombing civilians. It was a bit of a trope for a while when I was a younger man that the definition of irony was Henry Kissinger winning the Nobel Peace Prize after napalming Laos for the offence of being adjacent, I think, to Vietnam. It's not a period of history I'm particularly au fait with, but when I was a student, that was a line that people would bandy about with abandon, and here we are. So when I say that the conversation seems to have been squeezed out, I'm talking about things like the Pope. A senior Israeli official familiar with the call between the Israeli President Isaac Herzog and Pope Francis himself has said Francis told them it is forbidden to respond to terror with terror. He has essentially warned Israel against committing terror. And you have the Peter Brooks cartoon today in the Times talking about the bombing of civilians. It's a very clever cartoon because there are plenty of people on the right wing of international politics who are perfectly comfortable with the bombing of civilians. A bit too comfortable. I think the best you could say, the best you could do in a humanitarian sense is to argue that it was hateful and inevitable. You'd have to argue that it was, it's absolutely awful, but I do think we have to do it. What I find almost unbearable, and you saw a bit of it on Question Time last night, is the people who don't seem to think that it's absolutely awful. They just seem to think that we have to do it. There doesn't seem to be, well, maybe it's hypocritical, actually. Maybe I'm being hypocritical when you say, I wish people would seem more regretful about it, even if they argue that it is inevitable. The remarkable situation that we find ourselves in, essentially, has the Pope, the actual Pope, reportedly describing the continuing campaign in Gaza as an act of terrorism. That seems to be the implication. That's how the Washington Post have reported it today. They declined to clarify later whether the Pope was publicly or privately describing Israeli actions in Gaza as terrorism. But in a statement to the Washington Post, it did acknowledge that a call had taken place. And I use the Pope as an example because certainly growing up, the Pope was a sort of a gold standard of contribution to public discourse. You would take notice of what the Pope said. Something that's very ugly and sad about public discourse over the last 20 years is that it doesn't matter who you are anymore. People who claim that they're upholding Christian values when they attack refugees, for example, will then attack the Archbishop of Canterbury if he expresses sympathy for refugees. People prominent in government, prominent in public life, who trumpet their religiosity at every opportunity. I think Jacob Rees-Mogg was espousing the benefits of doing a rosary the other day, and yet they pursue policies in public life that are the polar opposite of Christ's teachings, and then they will attack the actual Archbishop of Canterbury if he offends their sensibilities by actually referring them back to what Jesus taught. And I think the same thing happens with the Pope. The Pope would once have been somebody that we all stopped and took notice of, but on this one, it depends on what your opinion was before he started speaking. So, 10 minutes after 10 is the time. So I'm going to have that ugly, uncomfortable, rather horrible conversation again, which is this. How does it end? How many Palestinians have to die before Israel considers the mission to be accomplished? Because you're not going to eradicate Hamas. It's just not going to happen, not least because the leaders are sitting in Qatar in air-conditioned luxury, and also because the next generation of haters of Israel are currently being radicalized by the Israeli bombardment. I don't know that there is... I suppose the best I can come up with, if I were to be seeking to justify the cessation of the ceasefire, and again, 3 people killed in Jerusalem yesterday at a bus stop, so 3,000 people in Gaza might die this week. I can't get my head around the argument that it is inevitable. And I don't want to get my head around the argument that it's inevitable, but it's probably a better place to be than the belief that it's both futile and bloody. I almost envy people who think it's necessary and inevitable, because that way you don't watch the carnage with a sense of horror and outrage. You watch it with a sense of, I hope, horror and, well, grim inevitability. And the longer it goes on, the harder it becomes for me to hold on to that thought, to hold on to that possibility, to that idea that it has to be done and there is a meaningful end game. No one believes they're going to eradicate Hamas, and we've seen now that even the release of the hostages isn't the ultimate purpose of Israel's foreign policy. It is reducing Gaza to a state in which any resurgence of Hamas-style activity, whether they call themselves Hamas or not, any resurgence of Hamas-style activity will be postponed for the longest possible time. So this is my thesis. Do with it what you will. The phone number you need is 0345 6060973. I'm not going to put you in Idiot's Corner, Craig, because I think that you're asking the question in good faith. Good morning, James. Were most Germans Nazis? We bombed their civilians to bits in retaliation. Who called for us to stop? Lots of people, mate. Bomber Harris, one of the most controversial figures in British military history, so much so that even Winston Churchill sought to distance himself in some ways from the campaigns in Dresden. European Convention on Human Rights, the Geneva Convention, all would render what the British allies did to Dresden and other parts of Germany war crimes in the current context. So I understand why you've asked that question, but it is not quite the zinger that you think it is. And another one, just to give you a little bit of context as to why I find these conversations difficult but necessary. Michael in Golders Green has been in touch to say, why do you keep on saying bombing civilians? Because they keep on bombing civilians, Michael, who adds Israel doesn't target civilians. Well, I'm afraid that the hit rate at the moment, even by Israeli army estimates, is about one Hamas terrorist for 20 civilians. So how you can object to the use of the phrase bombing civilians is truly beyond me, unless you're clinging to that idea that this is not a humanitarian apocalypse. What you have to do is say, yes, we are bombing civilians, Michael. We are bombing thousands of civilians. We are killing thousands upon thousands of children, of civilians, because it is a price worth paying in pursuit of the terrorists, with whom most of those civilians have nothing to do. You can't, I'm afraid, not on this programme. I'm not allowing you the moral fig leaf of pretending that civilians are not being bombed. They are being bombed. Your position, which you're not prepared to admit, even on a text, mate, come on. Even on a text, you're not prepared to admit that the bombing of the civilians is for you a price worth paying. So you have to somehow pretend semantically that they are not being bombed. For the record, every death is awful. And the question hinges upon the fact that 1,000 deaths are worse than 10 deaths, or 20,000 deaths are worse than 200 deaths, or 30,000 deaths are worse than 500 deaths, or 200 deaths are worse than 3 deaths. So this is not a comparison of human value. This is not ignoring the fact that missiles fly at Israel, or that the terror attack of October the 7th was one of the most hideous episodes in living memory of man's inhumanity to man. But we're not talking about that today. We are talking about the bombardment of Gaza. That is all that we are talking about. And we are asking this question: how does it end? And now I'll tell you how it ends. It ends with Gaza reduced to rubble, and the established confidence in Israel that the resumption of hostilities from that part of the Middle East directed towards Israel, motivated by some of the basest and vilest thoughts and feelings that humanity has ever seen, motivated in large part by base anti-Semitism, but also, of course, motivated by a burning sense of injustice at what has just happened. So when it starts again, it will be motivated by a million different things. But what has happened in the last month will be part of it. So my view is the Israeli position, very simply, is to reduce Gaza to rubble so that the longest possible period of time will unfold before people from that part of the world are ready to start attacking Israelis again. And I think that is devoid of moral judgment. I'm not currently applying any moral judgment to that. I am describing to you what I believe is happening. I don't think I could live with that if I were called upon to implement that policy, but I'm not. So that is what is happening. It is not about eradicating Hamas, because that is provably impossible. It is not about releasing hostages, because we have seen this week that Hamas's cynical attempts to string out hostage release in return for continuing ceasefire has been rejected. It has failed. It has been overtaken by events. And therefore you're left with a simple question: what is really going on? And the answer to that question, devoid of moral judgment, the answer to that question is this: we will bomb so many civilians in Gaza, hopefully catch and kill as many Hamas terrorists as possible, but we don't really care how many civilians die in pursuit of that goal, because what we really want to see is Gaza reduced to such prehistoric status that the likelihood of them getting back on their feet and back in the saddle and back on the warpath against innocent Israelis is going to be postponed for as long as possible. And I think people have to start admitting that that is what is happening, and also what they want. Because the rest, I think, is noise. That is what is happening. It doesn't matter how many civilians die, and it doesn't really matter how many Hamas terrorists are caught up in the bombardments. What we want to do is reduce Gaza to a state where the longest possible period of time will unfold before they're back on their bloody warpath. And I don't really understand why people are so reluctant to admit that. Why people like Michael have to object to the use of the phrase bombing civilians when civilians are being bombed. There you go. I've put it all out there. What do you think? 0345 6060 973. It is 22 minutes after 10. My thanks to Andrew in Hampstead for having the, I don't think courage is quite the right word, but whatever it is you need to tell the truth. He goes, face it, James, the, quotes, civilians, end quotes, overwhelmingly support Hamas and carried out atrocities on the 7th of October and terror attacks for the last 50, 70 plus years and will continue to carry out atrocities against Israel according to their masters. Even when Gaza is reduced to rubble, the civilians will continue to carry out attacks from their remaining tunnels. There are no innocent civilians, because if there were, they would be asking to leave. Thank you for your attention. And there it is. There are no innocent civilians. That is the only rationale I can see for Benjamin Netanyahu's pledge yesterday to continue the bombardment of Gaza, in that they think all 2 million people that were living there on October the 7th are culpable and guilty. And if you believe that, then you have, as Andrew has just demonstrated, an intellectually defensible position. Morally indefensible in the minds of many, but at least intellectually defensible. The alternative is to do what Michael did and to pretend that there's something inaccurate about using the phrase bombing civilians, or to talk about human shields, or to discuss the essential objective of eradicating Hamas, while never really admitting that it is impossible without killing untold numbers of civilians, and even then almost certain not to be achieved, because next generations will grow and leaders remain miles away from Gaza. So is there any other analysis of what Benjamin Netanyahu said to Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, yesterday? Nothing will stop us, except somehow the notion that everybody on the Gaza Strip deserves to die. Noel's in Oxford. Noel, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Yes, well, just refreshing to hear what you're saying. It seems to be that the media has kind of pulled back entirely from calling it what it is. And it is
only in this country. The Spanish Prime Minister yesterday said he had genuine doubts about whether Israel was complying with international humanitarian law.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you've got to take a couple of things into consideration. Netanyahu is a very strange, very far-right Prime Minister. He's running an extreme right Israeli government, which seems to got by everybody. I mean, these are people who just believe there is no two-state solution, extreme right by anyone.
Well, he's also a populist, so there is always the possibility that he'll pivot in a completely different direction if it serves his self-interest.
And he needs to stay in power. Don't forget, he's got several indictments facing him. I mean, his brother was a very famous Israeli war hero, and on the back of that, he got the power, but he's been corrupt. I mean, it's interesting to hear the Undersecretary of Defence for, I think, under Barack Obama, was it Ben Rhodes, who met him and said, look, you know, he's just the wrong guy. He's in trouble in Israel. He'll do anything. He's made deals with every ultra-right. I mean, I'm trying to think, it's like making a deal with the old BNP here in the UK. The Tories gone in. That's the sort of state we're at. But, I mean, to take it onto a wider footing, I mean, at what point do you stop listening to the Israeli media machine saying we're targeting its laser precision? This is a 21st century military with the might and the weaponry of the USA, and they are attacking. They're calling it a war, and I don't understand. A war to me was Germany, England. You've got planes, we've got planes. You've got missiles, we've got missiles. You've got tanks, you've got 1 million men, we've got 1 million men. This is an incursion into Gaza to basically, as you say, to say to the Palestinians, where are you going to go? The south, the north? No, you're going to go into the sea. There is no Palestine. There's going to be an Israeli state.
But to pursue Hamas members, they say, and what they don't say out loud, but which I think everybody now, regardless of how they feel about this conflict, everybody probably acknowledges at some level, to pursue Hamas members regardless of how many civilians die. And that's how you end up like Anthony in Hampstead saying there's no such thing as an innocent civilian, or you end up like Marcus, who's been in touch, to say what you and many others don't seem to understand is that it's very easy for the people to rise up against Hamas and outnumber them for the sake of their own land, but they won't because they want this to happen. The easiest way is just to wipe Gaza off the map. They have nothing to offer the world anyway.
Well, it's very sad to hear that. I mean,
it's heartbreaking to hear that, but it's the only way. You have to hold that view.
Well, that's why you're on the radio, because you speak against these idiots and against these people who just want mass bloodshed, the hate on one side. Look, you can tell by my accent, I come from Ireland. My family grew up in the north. I watched for years, you know, and I heard stories about if you're Catholic in the north, you couldn't get a house, you couldn't get a job. the British soldiers who ruled the north back then, they kick your door in, they call you fiend and this, that, and that. But there was a peace process because people thought, fundamentally there has to be peace. The next generation coming through, where are you going to go? The Irish weren't going to leave, they were going to stay. That peace process has worked because there's enough people willing to have a sensible conversation, say, look, we are all fundamentally the same people.
And the Irish example is powerful and pertinent because at various points in history you would have found representatives from either side who professed a commitment to the eradication of everybody else. There are two ways peace is achieved. Either one side is completely wiped out, or eventually you thrash out some form of compromise. There is literally no other path to peace. And what seems to be missing from this analysis is that while members of Hamas speak quite openly about wanting to eradicate Israel and are rightly derided for doing so, everybody kind of goes a little bit quiet at the prospect of Israel now being embarked upon a very deliberate mission to eradicate Gaza.
I mean, it goes back to the fact that everyone, I forget which commentator it was who came out, it was UN properly, and said something along the lines, what do you expect? I mean, you can't even open your mouth and have a criticism because you're pushed down. I mean, the very famous Jewish author, Norman Finkelstein, he criticized the Israeli state openly. Both his parents.
He's a divisive figure.
He made a point about the fact, the Israeli state now. I don't know how many UN resolutions. There's not enough intelligently vocal Palestinian speakers coming through who can say, look, this has been going on, what is it, 6 decades. Israel were given 51% of the land when they wanted a homeland. No one argued that. The atrocities of the Holocaust, no one can argue that. And they deserve a state, and they've got that. They now have something like 80%. I don't know my figures exactly, but 80% of it. If you live in Palestine and you're then walled in, and the occupying forces control your water, your gas, your electricity, your power, and you are basically in a slum and you have no job prospects, you haven't got a right to movement, what do you do? Your home was bulldozed, your brother shot. Some people have lost 60 members of the same family.
Well, most people, and you've taken me right up to the wire, and I will answer your question, most people endure, and some people respond both illegally and disgustingly. I don't think that the conditions in an occupied territory ever become sufficient to justify terrorism. That's my personal view. But you're introducing a moral dimension, and oddly, and I'm not criticising for you doing so because it's almost impossible not to. But I don't want to today. I don't want a moral dimension. I just want to examine the proposal that there is no other explanation now of what Israel is doing except the eradication of Gaza, which some people were calling for from the very start. And it's disgusting, grim language, but it is at least honest, as my two correspondents, Marcus and Michael, have demonstrated. People are prepared to say out loud, they all deserve to die. And I wonder whether that is actually a challengeable position in the context of what is actually unfolding. So when Netanyahu says, nothing will stop us, I have sworn to destroy Hamas, he means nothing will stop us. There is literally no number of civilians that will be too high. Nothing will stop us. Tell me I'm wrong. On 0345 6060 973. Lottie Morley's here with your headlines. It is 10:34 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I was struck last week when we discussed this situation. I was struck by how cross some people were by me citing some 40-year-old quotes of Benjamin Netanyahu supporting very explicitly ethnic cleansing and saying that Mizrahi soldiers need Ashkenazi officers to command them. Ashkenazi in this context essentially means white. The quotes appear in Max Hastings' memoir Going to the Wars, which was published in 2000. Netanyahu has denied them, but they are worth looking at in the context of what we think he means when he says nothing will stop us. This is Benjamin Netanyahu talking at his dinner table in Jerusalem to Max Hastings. According to Max Hastings, one of the finest war correspondents this country's ever produced. And I say that with a heavy heart because he once sacked my dad. In the next war, says Netanyahu, if we do it right, we'll have a chance to get all the Arabs out. We can clear the West Bank, sort out Jerusalem. And he then joked about the Golani Brigade, which is, or was, the Israeli infantry force where many of the soldiers were North African or Yemenite Jews. And he grinned, they're okay as long as they're led by white officers. So, it is obvious. Here you go. Here's another example of people who are prepared to say it out loud, whether they realise that they're breaking a form of omerta when they do so or not. I'm so sick and tired of everyone calling for Israel to stop. They just dislike the fact that the Jews can fight back this time. They want Israel to cease and Hamas to fire. They don't. The word ceasefire is easy to understand. They refused the two-state solution. That's a historically questionable contribution to the conversation, certainly in the context of what is likely to come at the end of this round of conflicts. But the majority of Palestinians in the latest polls, over 70%, support Hamas, so they are far from innocent. You cannot have peace talks with a Nazi-type group who just want the extermination of all Jews. A lot of people in the West are useful idiots. Now, when you write that text, I don't know whether you realise that to anybody independent and objective, it sounds like you're calling for the eradication or the extermination of all Arabs on the Gaza Strip. I don't know. I honestly don't know whether you realise that, because if that's not your intention, then I would urge you to choose your words more carefully. 10:37 is the time. Naz is in Enfield. Naz, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that I'd like to thank you, actually, James. You're the first person that has actually, in the media, had the courage to say this.
I don't think I am.
Because,
I've seen very right-wing commentators call for the destruction of Gaza. I've seen them call for Gaza to be reduced to rubble. I'm just pointing out that that's probably the only intellectually defensible description of what is likely to happen next.
But I agree with you. My son has a friend, and she saw her family on video were killed. So it was awful. It was on video, and her family were killed. Everybody except a baby was left alive, and these were just innocent Palestinians just walking just around.
A couple of the texts I've read out this morning deny the existence of innocent Palestinians, don't they?
Yes, but you see, if you say something, sometimes we're all a bit frightened now to call it for what it is, in case we're labelled as anti-Semitic. I think it's very difficult to.
I think we've gone beyond that. I think saying please stop bombing Gaza, I don't think anyone is going to accuse you of being anti-Semitic. The closest people will come was the text that I just read out. He says they just dislike the fact that the Jews can fight back this time. The Hamas want the extermination of all Jews. And that wouldn't go so far, because it would be so ridiculous to claim that wanting those humans over there not to die means you must hate those humans over there. But certainly some discussion about Israel in the past can very much veer into territory where any criticism of the Likud party or the policies of Benjamin Netanyahu gets described as anti-Semitic by people very keen to close down the criticism because they would struggle to deal with it honestly or directly.
I don't know if you listen sometime, Mark Ragev. He doesn't accept. I mean, what they do is they seem to be, Netanyahu at the moment, dehumanizing the Palestinians. I mean, there's some quotes of human animals, which is really frightening.
Well, again, if you apply that only to Hamas, I can see the justification for that position. Let me ask you a tricky question, if you don't mind.
Yes.
If they came out and said, we don't care how many civilians die, we will kill them all if we have to, would you feel better?
No. Well, in a way.
Sorry, I think you've got a bit of a frog in your throat, Naz. I'll let you clear it, but it's 20 minutes to 11. I'm suffering similarly myself at the moment, but I have a button I can press when I find myself in that situation. Better is an odd word to use, but would it be better for the world for the commentary if the Israeli government and its supporters were prepared to say what many of my correspondents this morning are prepared to say, which is, we do not believe there are any innocent civilians in Gaza. Therefore, we are happy to kill them all. That is what my correspondents are saying. Admittedly, they think they're criticising me when they say it, but there it is. There it is, saying it out loud. I'll read you a couple more, or I'll remind you of one of the first ones to come in. What you and many others don't seem to understand is it's very easy for the people to rise up against Hamas. This sounds a little bit like what's his chops talking about slavery, doesn't it? I've forgotten his name, Kim Kardashian's husband, who was talking about how he couldn't believe that slaves put up with being slaves, and because if he was there at the time, he'd have risen up against Kanye, isn't it? He'd have risen up against them. So, of course, if they wanted to get rid of Hamas, they could do it easily. But they don't, because they want all this to happen. Therefore, writes Marcus, and I read out texts on this rather than tweets because they have phone numbers on them, which means they're checkable, they're real people. And Marcus writes, we should just the easiest way is just to wipe Gaza off the map. They have nothing to offer the world anyway. And I think that is what is underpinning the belief of right-wing commentators who talk about raising Gaza to the ground or making it rubble, and very carefully avoid talking about the human cost that would involve. Would it somehow become a more honest conversation in which independent observers would find it easier to hold a position if Netanyahu expanded upon what he means when I say, I have sworn to destroy Hamas, nothing will stop us, and returned, for example, to what he was prepared to say 40 years ago, according to the journalist Max Hastings, when he was perfectly prepared to say that we will get a chance to wipe out the Arabs completely. His words. I took a slightly strange call earlier this week from someone who objected to the use of the word Arabs, but I'm quoting, well, not only is it a technically accurate word, but I'm quoting Benjamin Netanyahu. In the next war, if we do it right, we'll have a chance to get all the Arabs out. We can clear the West Bank, sort out Jerusalem. I mean, what else is motivating him when he says nothing will stop us? Graham's in Borehamwood. Graham, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I think the one word that seems to be missing from all of these conversations about the terrible situation there is the word surrender. The needless killing of people can simply stop today if Hamas simply surrendered. And there's precedent for that because the PLO were fighting in Jordan and realised they were against insurmountable odds. They surrendered and left the country, and then peace was restored.
With respect, Graham, the conversation we're having today is about the scenario absent surrender. It's about what Netanyahu means when he says nothing will stop us, and the question of why there is this reluctance, although to their credit, many of my contributors today are shrugging off that reluctance, a reluctance to admit that Israel is perfectly prepared to kill every civilian in Gaza.
I think, James, I think that Netanyahu's political future is very limited. He's not going to last long after this.
Well, that'll be little comfort to anybody burying their child next week.
Well, yes, but the point is they don't have to bury their child if Hamas put the white flag up. Simple as that.
Yes, but as I've just reminded you respectfully, the conversation we're having today is about what Netanyahu is doing, not what Hamas should be doing. And what Netanyahu is doing is clearly, to my mind, embarking upon a policy built upon the belief that every single human being in Gaza deserves to die.
Yeah, I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but the point of the message...
Challenge it.
The point should be that as soon as Hamas...
But you can't have a conversation about what Netanyahu is doing by telling me what you think Hamas should be doing.
Well,
it's not a conversation. Here's a question. What is Netanyahu... Graham, the question is, what is Netanyahu doing? Your answer can't be, let me tell you what Hamas should be doing. Do you see that?
No, I don't.
Let me say it again. Let me say it again. Let me say it again.
By surrendering.
Let me say it again.
They have power.
Let me say it again.
If they surrender, the Israelis will chuck him out. Simple as that.
Let me say it again. The question, what is Netanyahu doing, does not admit the answer, let me tell you what Hamas should be doing. You must see that.
I don't.
Well, would you mind trying a bit harder?
I see that the cause of the problem...
Would you mind trying a tiny bit harder? Would you mind trying a tiny bit harder?
I'm just trying as hard as I can.
Okay, then I'll say it once more. I'll say it once more. The question is, what is Benjamin Netanyahu doing, a man who has talked in the past of having a chance to get all the Arabs out? What is he doing in the next war? If we do it right, we'll have a chance to get all the Arabs out. So again, respectfully, that rather removes the precedent of previous negotiations or surrenders from the table, because he's already talking in his own mind about the next war. We get all the Arabs out. The question of what is his end game, what is his purpose, you cannot answer that question by telling me, here's a complete counterfactual about what I think Hamas should be doing. And what I think...
The end game for Netanyahu is probably a prison cell if he gets convicted for corruption.
Yeah, that's another helpful distraction, but I mean, a rather transparent one.
Well, that's your view, not mine.
No, it's not. No, talking about Netanyahu being in a prison cell is a distraction from the question of what his current military policy is. That's not a view. That's not a view. That's a statement of fact. It's not a view.
Well, his position will become irrelevant at the moment Hamas surrender.
So what is his position? What is the position? What is the position that would become irrelevant?
He will no longer have power if Hamas surrenders.
No, you said his position would become irrelevant. What is his position?
Yeah. His position is now, it doesn't matter.
But what is it, though?
As soon as they surrender,
what is it?
Then the war stops and the Israeli people will throw him out of power.
What is the position?
I have no idea what his position is. I can't know what's in his mind.
So you don't know what the words "nothing will stop us" mean?
Well, words that were said 20, 30 years
No, this was
ago
yesterday.
Probably were... I'm sure he is not interested in genocide. The Israeli people.
What does nothing will stop us
genocide.
mean then? What does it mean? What is his position? He said to the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, in Jerusalem yesterday, not 20 years ago. And also, again, respectfully, if you thought that saying he said that 20 years ago somehow diffused the words, then you must be acknowledging the power of the words when you suddenly discover that they were actually said yesterday. So what do you think they mean?
I don't know what they mean.
Yes, you do.
I don't know what. I don't.
You do, Graham. Of course you do. Well, let's go through them. Let's go through them one by one. Let's go through them one by one. What does the word nothing? What does the word nothing mean?
It's irrelevant once the fighting stops.
What does the word nothing mean?
He'll no longer have any power. He'll be a footnote in history.
That's all very interesting, but what does the word nothing mean?
I'm sorry, I don't see where you're going with that.
Well, it's a fairly straightforward attempt to help you understand what the words "nothing will stop us" mean, because you just said you didn't.
Well, he wants to see Hamas eradicated.
Talking about the word, what does the word "nothing"
frankly,
mean?
I don't think, from a military point of view, you'll ever eradicate Hamas.
What does the word "nothing" mean?
Not the point. The point is...
I'm afraid it is the point. It's what he said yesterday, and it's his policy that you phoned in to discuss.
People are needlessly being slaughtered.
Well, I agree with that. So what does the phrase "nothing will stop us" mean? It means there is no level of...
to stop it is for Hamas to surrender.
Okay, so we're back...
argument.
But no, it's not the end of...
The government changes, and they all can get together, and Gaza can be rebuilt.
Graham, you can talk all day, and I'm going to keep you on the line until you tell me what you think "nothing will stop us" means.
I don't know what you...
Yes, you do.
I can't say what...
Of course you can.
...is in his mind.
So you can conjure up a confident prediction of what would happen in Israel in the event of Hamas surrendering.
Hamas.
Graham, you're letting yourself down. What does "nothing will stop us" mean?
He means he wants to eradicate Hamas.
No, he doesn't. What does "nothing will stop us" mean?
It means he'll do what it takes to eradicate Hamas.
So what would stop him from continuing that course? How many deaths?
The surrender of Hamas would stop him.
No, nothing will stop us.
The surrender of Hamas would stop
Graham,
him.
you know what these words mean, Graham? It means
surrender of Hamas would stop
it means he's
tonight.
prepared to kill 2 million civilians.
No, it doesn't. Don't be stupid.
Well, so you know what it doesn't. You know what it doesn't mean,
James. You're being absolutely ridiculous.
So what does it mean then?
It means he wants to eradicate Hamas.
No, what does "nothing will stop us" mean? Because you know what it doesn't mean.
He will use all the military power he has to eradicate Hamas.
Yes, and the civilians who are caught up in the crossfire?
If they're being used by Hamas as human shields, they are a terrible consequence of war, which Hamas will stop by surrendering.
So there we are, all 2 million of them.
No.
So how many?
You're being just fantastic.
Well, thank you, but how many?
How
many, Graham? How many, Graham? How many?
There is no point playing numbers games.
But you just rejected 2 million.
No, I'm not rejecting. I'm not putting any numbers on it. It's a military situation.
How many is too many?
It will be stopped by Hamas surrendering? Why won't you agree that if Hamas surrender, the war stops?
Because I'm not psychic. And I'm talking about Benjamin Netanyahu's current policy, which is nothing will stop us. And you can't even say what those 4 words mean because
I'm sorry,
because the words would turn the words would a hypothetical situation, Graham. You're here to talk about.
You're not that clever.
Oh, I am. You're here to talk about Hamas surrendering, and you're criticising me for discussing a hypothetical situation.
Well, it's not a hypothetical situation for Hamas to surrender.
Okay,
I'll give you an
Graham.
example. Arafat surrendered in Jordan, and they all went out of Jordan, and there was peace.
And Netanyahu said, in the next war, if we do it right, we'll have a chance to get all the Arabs out. So it was just an exercise in mowing the lawn, I think, is the phrase that's often used.
Well,
just before you go, and I'll ask you this again respectfully, why do you find it so hard to answer that question, nothing will stop? Is it because you do know the answer and you don't want to say it out loud?
I don't agree. I don't know the answer, and you don't know the answer as well. You're just throwing these words up in the air, and frankly, they're an incitement.
Well, I'm asking you what they mean, that's all.
No, I've told you what they mean. They mean the eradication of Hamas. Simple as that.
And what does nothing mean?
I've told you. I mean, I like talking to the wall.
Well, I know how you feel. But nothing will stop us means there is absolutely no limit upon how much civilian death we will accommodate in pursuit of what you describe as the eradication of Hamas. Why do you find that so hard to admit?
Because I don't agree with you. I don't think it means that at all.
So what does it mean then?
The eradication of Hamas.
So what does
Hamas can stop it tonight.
Okay, Graham. I mean, down with hypotheticals and numbers games. Nothing will stop us. There are 2 million people in Gaza, and there are 20, 30,000 Hamas terrorists, say 50,000 if you prefer. How many of the 2 million must die in pursuit of the eradication of the 50,000? So the reason I read out those grim texts earlier is because I don't want to accuse Graham of lacking courage, because I think he's a better person in some ways than Marcus, who writes about the easiest way is just to wipe Gaza off the map. They have nothing to offer the world anyway. Because Graham's moral compass prevents him from going there in public, out loud. I think even in private he can't conceive of Gaza being wiped off the map, and in Marcus's words, they have nothing to offer the world anyway. But unless you are prepared to say that out loud, then you end up having to pretend that you don't know what the words "nothing will stop us" mean. Or that an answer to the question of what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing could somehow entail a hypothetical about what Hamas should do instead. It's a bit like saying, "What time is it?" To which Graham would respond by saying, "Well, quite chilly actually, and you should probably pack an umbrella." It's 10:53. 10:56 is the time, slightly late to the last break. Just, in the interests of telling you what I put up with, and also how, I suppose, bent people's brains can be when understandably discussing these issues. This just arrived in my inbox. Do you enjoy stoking up and inciting Jew hatred? Because that is what you are doing this morning. You are surely better than that. The question we're asking today is, how many Palestinians is Benjamin Netanyahu prepared to kill in pursuit of Hamas? And that is stoking up Jew hatred, according to our friend here. 10:57 is the time. Mignon is in Cranbrook. Mignon, what would you like to say?
Well, first of all, let me make this clear. It's not Jew hatred. It's Zionists. Zionists believe that they have the right to do what they are doing right now. And Netanyahu is a Zionist, and so is his far right-wing military and government spokespeople and cabinet. I'm not exactly sure how Israeli politics works, but his officials constantly say things like, there are no innocent Gazans, that including children. They openly speak about basically annihilating Gaza. They are committing genocide. 2.1 million people in Gaza. 43% of the homes are now destroyed. That's 1.7 million, I think, at the moment, are displaced, homeless. They've lost everything overnight. 70% of the casualties are women and children, mostly children. 50% of the population in Gaza are under the age of 14. There are no innocent Gazans. But
you, I find it a ridiculous position. But I suppose the only area of contention here is whether or not the people who say it truly believe it or not. And I think they probably do, don't they? I mean...
Zionists. Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of radical
I find that word
Zionists,
unhelpful. I don't mean to criticise you particularly, but I don't find that word helpful because it can also be taken to simply mean people who believe in the right of the modern state of Israel to exist. And also, I'm not doing the lazy BBC balance thing when I point out that Hamas is dedicated to the complete destruction of Israel, or the death of every Jew in Israel at the moment. So I see an equivalence there, which I often feel in the West or in the British media particularly, you're not really allowed to acknowledge.
No, absolutely. And we're dealing with a underground terrorist group. I condemn Hamas. I loathe Hamas. However, the IDF, the way they're behaving is, I don't want to say it, but they are killing a lot of children.
The Pope has raised the possibility that they are responding to terrorism with terrorism. So you don't need to say it yourself. You can simply refer to the Pope, who is widely regarded as a fairly valid contributor to matters of peace. So just to take it back to Graham's call, which I didn't enjoy particularly, and I'm sure he didn't either, why does an obviously decent person, unlike some of my correspondents this morning who almost relish in the prospect of, and are quite happy to admit that they want everyone in Gaza to be killed, why is there a reluctance to acknowledge what the words "nothing will stop us" really mean in this context?
People just don't want to accept what's going on because we support Israel. We had David Cameron visit Netanyahu, sit next to him after, the death toll now, and the UN agree, is up to 15,000, 50%, or I think it's 48% or something like that, are children. And David Cameron sat next to Netanyahu and said, "We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel." Can you imagine what a Palestinian British person or a Muslim, how they might feel in this country right now? Now, I know I loathe
I don't have to imagine because they get in touch with me and tell me.
Yeah, and I loathe anti-Semitism. I mean, I actually have a friend in America who joined the IDF. He's Jewish, and he actually went to Israel to join the IDF. And he actually went AWOL during his training because he couldn't stand the barbaric...
I mean, I'm trying to steer everybody back onto the central course.
Yeah.
I mean, the simple question of what is Benjamin Netanyahu doing when he talks about eradicating Hamas, which pretty much everybody accepts is impossible. He is seeking to... I hate this phrase, mow the lawn, but someone has used it. Someone sent me articles. You reduce Gaza into a condition where the period of time...
It's uninhabitable.
Between now and the next round of hostilities directed at Israel is as long as they can possibly achieve.
They've made it uninhabitable. They've bombed the hospitals, the
that's all true. That's all part of what I'm describing.
Churches.
But if Israel lives under existential threat, constant existential threat, if not from the actual military capabilities of Hamas, then from what they hold in their heart. So what else are they supposed to do except try to prolong for as long as possible the resumption of hostilities? And I asked that question quite robustly, Mignon.
I don't know what they're going to do about Hamas because they can't seem to.
But what else could they do?
Well, they're meant to have the most state-of-the-art.
I don't think that. Well, I don't think we can start saying there are some brilliant weapons, but they go to a different school. If Hamas are absolutely permeated through the population, which we know that they are. There's a good piece in the Telegraph today by their global health security editor, Paul Newkey, and he talks about how everybody accepts that the fighters have vanished into the general population and that hunting them down will come at a huge human cost. So
400 civilians have to die for one terrorist.
Well, there it is. And I think that's where we divide, including the people who accuse me of Jew hatred, which is, luckily I'm big enough and ugly enough to treat that with the contempt it deserves.
I've been called an anti-Semite, and I'm not.
Well, I hear that, but the bottom line here is the pursuit of the terrorists who are completely contained now within the population, who have vanished into the general population. The pursuit of them justifies the death of the other.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. And the international community is not doing anything about it. Do you think...
I'm very late for the news. Well, the international community is. Even the Spanish Prime Minister yesterday cast doubts on whether or not Israel was complying with international humanitarian law. There's something about British and American media, oddly. You see this almost reflected at the UN as well, that paints a rather different picture for reasons I don't really understand, to be honest. Anyway, thank you. It's 3 minutes after 11. It's 7 minutes after 11. We will move on, and we will no doubt return to almost the same question at some point next week. I'd just say a quick word about the accusation of Jew hatred, which I think is very illustrative. I think it's very illuminating. So there are very straightforward questions to be asked now. How much civilian death in Gaza is too much? Either in the mind of someone who supports the current campaign or, more pertinently, in the mind of Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, a couple of calls in the last hour, one in particular, demonstrated that decent people find that question impossible to answer and will do anything to avoid it. They will claim they don't know what the words mean. They will talk about a mythical Hamas surrender. They will accuse the person of asking the question of being silly or acting in bad faith. But they are crucial and obviously important questions. How much civilian death is too much in pursuit of the purported desire to eradicate Hamas? So either you pretend not to understand what the word means, or you accuse the person asking the questions of being silly, which is, a perfectly reasonable thing to do in the context of polite discourse, or you offer up a non sequitur. You answer a question about Benjamin Netanyahu with a statement about Hamas. All of those things allow you to avoid answering the question because you know what the answer is and you really don't want to voice it. You don't want to articulate it. So in many ways, I respect that fear of articulating the full horror of what we face. But the alternative is to try to shut down the questioner, to try to silence the questioner, to try to render the questioner so cowed by your accusation that he will cease asking the question that you can't or won't answer. And so that's why the keyboard warriors would use a phrase like Jew hatred, which I do actually find offensive, but not so offensive that it will stop me from asking very simple and straightforward questions that you, trying to turn the horrors of anti-Semitism into a cheap debating point from behind the anonymity of your keyboard, you will not win. I won't stop asking the question, but neither will I stop giving you the opportunity to answer it with something other than vile bile. 9 minutes after 11 is the time. I'm glad we've cleared that up. I could turn attention next to a completely different story. The conversation that I would like to have next is about Matt Hancock. And the problem I have with stuff like this is you would think, wouldn't you, if you just gave it some passing attention, you'd think that the broader my question was, the more likely you were to call me. So if I were to say, because in a way it's like the goalposts are so wide you can't miss. So if I go, what do you think of the COVID inquiry? And then you would ring me in your millions. But actually, it wouldn't necessarily be that interesting, although on this occasion I think it would be. I would love just to say, what do you think of the COVID inquiry? But the broader or vaguer my question is, history has taught me, the less likely you are to ring in. There are days when I just want to say, here's a thing, let's have a chat about it. But I can't. Very occasionally we find a way of almost pulling it off. But the truth of the medium is that you often need a much more specific question. My job is to kind of give you what's the word I'm looking for? Is to give you the detail to which you can respond. The vaguer the question, the less compelling the invitation to contribute becomes. I don't really understand why. I wish it wasn't the case. It'd make my life a lot easier in a way. I could come on every morning and go, right, here's the topic, give me a call, 0345 6060 973. The COVID-19 inquiry, what do you think? 0345 9090, whatever it is, 6060 973. 1111 is the time. But I can't do that because it doesn't work. So today there are two elements of what Matt Hancock said yesterday, and he's still talking now. I think he's been home. I'm not 100% sure. There are two things that he said yesterday that I thought were really, really interesting. And I can't get my hands on how important it is or how important they are. because they seem to me to be traffic stopping. They seem to me to be interventions of almost unbelievable importance. And yet the whole COVID-19 inquiry has become caught up almost in cotton wool. It's as if incredible revelations are being made, and we have become somehow inured to them or immune to their full power. I'm going to start with Eat Out to Help Out, and I'm going to start with something that I think is or was extraordinary. I find this, and I don't think I'm naive, I think this is an almost unbelievable revelation. And yet it has happened very casually and very calmly in the context of the COVID-19 inquiry in the last 24 hours.
Did you know in advance of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme?
No, that was announced not ahead of its announcement on the 8th of July.
No.
In fact, cases were still falling at that point.
Did you raise your concern when the scheme was announced? And of course it was announced in advance of the beginning of August and meant to take effect on
3rd of August, I think.
Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays for those 4 weeks of August?
I didn't know about the Eat Out to Help Out scheme until the cabinet meeting on the morning of its announcement, and it was one of a package of loosenings. We were doing a number of things to bring back a bit of freedom over the summer.
As the Secretary of State for Health, had you been told and had you been asked for your view, what would you have said?
I don't know.
Well, Mr. Hancock, you've told the inquiry that there is in this debate between caution and allowing release, and it's a difficult debate, a public health view, which you as the Secretary of State are plainly on the side of caution.
Yes.
Because that's your job.
What mattered in the opening then was that there wasn't overall too much. And in the end, there was overall too much. Which individual items of opening you did or didn't do is second order compared to the overall amount of openings. I was at the same time campaigning internally to get funding so that those who tested positive would isolate, which we eventually got put in place in September. And I thought that was the most important use of money.
Did you express serious reservations about the scheme once you became aware of it, given your well-known position as Secretary of State for Health on the balance between release and positive promotion of eating out and caution?
Once it was announced, it was a done deal that it was government policy. I expressed caution and argued very strongly against its extension at the end of August, and I don't think its extension was ever seriously in prospect.
So you did argue very strongly against it, did you?
I argued that it shouldn't be extended.
It was a serious issue, though, was it not, in terms of the possible, and I'm not going to go into debate about what the impact actually was in terms of prevalence, but in terms of at least the perception in intervention areas, it was a serious problem.
In intervention areas, it was unhelpful that the state should be subsidising people to go out at the same time as asking people to be more cautious.
So you're getting an indication there that the Secretary of State of Health had no prior warning that the Chancellor of the Exchequer was about to announce a sort of COVID party where everyone goes down Wagamamas and starts licking each other's faces. I exaggerate slightly, but for reasons that will become clear, only slightly. We'll return to this in a moment. The question I'm going to ask you is not clear in my mind, and this keeps happening when we come to COVID. I want to say something like, this is a really big deal, isn't it? Why is it not getting more traction? But it is getting reported a lot. It is getting reported a lot. It's getting reported everywhere. I've got exchanges here in front of me between Dominic Cummings, Matt Hancock, Boris Johnson and Mark Sedwill. But I just have a sense that the impact is not what it should be. And I think I might be part of the problem, not the solution. Is that I'm sitting here thinking, this is outrageous. Pause, brackets, isn't it? Question mark, close brackets.
WhatsApp from you to Simon Case. Just want to let you know directly, we've had lots of feedback that Eat Out to Help Out is causing problems in our intervention areas. I've kept it out of the news, but it's serious. This is you, Mr. Hancock.
Yes.
Have you told Rishi? And then Mr. Case says again, I don't think he can afford to extend it. And then you, yes, we've told Treasury. We've been protecting them in the comms, and thankfully it hasn't bubbled up.
Yes.
So the position you took was indeed that it was serious, that's your word.
Yes.
That you told the Treasury.
Yes.
But whilst you did so, you protected the Treasury in the news, you concealed your concerns about the seriousness of the impact of this scheme, and you expressed thanks, gratitude, it hadn't come to light.
That's because I abide by collective responsibility. And I was being encouraged by various journalists who would presume that I was against it to criticise the then Chancellor. But I believe that government is a team effort. And so I didn't want that to become a row in public. I mean, you can see during the whole pandemic the corrosive effect of leaks. I was not part of that, and I don't appreciate government by leak, and hence I abided by collective responsibility on and off the record. That's what I'm saying there.
So you're in this odd position now of thinking, well, I kind of buy that. Secretary of State for Health knew that Eat Out to Help Out was causing a huge spike in infections, and he colluded in keeping it out of the newspapers because he didn't want to embarrass his colleagues. Is that collective cabinet responsibility? And then ultimately, who is responsible then for what happened? Rishi Sunak's now Prime Minister. It's 18 minutes after 11. We're going to talk about this shortly. And by the time we start talking about it, I promise to have come up with a really clever question that will encourage and enable you to ring in with brilliant contributions. 22 minutes after 11. It's a funny old world, isn't it? I spent an hour yesterday with Omid Scobie, the journalist who's written this book, Endgame, about the royal family who's dominating all of the front pages. It's for full disclosure, which you can download already. It's already available on Global Player. I really liked him. We had a really nice chat, but it's full disclosure. It's not a sort of desperate attempt to draw attention to myself or pursue clicks and largely meaningless headlines. But I completely forgot to tell you, because the news about the ceasefire ending in Gaza, or about the COVID inquiry throwing up truly extraordinary revelations, just seems to me to be immeasurably, and I'm sure to Omid as well, immeasurably more important than the conversations and the stories about who said what and when about the baby that Meghan Markle was expecting, or other elements of the book that is about a lot more than Harry and Meghan. But there we go. So I'm so distracted by the real news that I completely forgot to tell you about my my insights into what pretty much every newspaper, or certainly all the cheaper prints, the Daily Mail's gone mad for it, considered to be the most important story in town at the moment. So I'll play you a little clip of that later. I'll play you another clip, the same clip again, the second time. Listen to this carefully now, and then tell me who's coming out better. The man whose political career is over, or the man who is now Prime Minister? Rishi Sunak did laps of honour about Eat Out to Help Out. I think even in his leadership campaign, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, I mean that, by the way, even in his leadership campaign, short of things to point to as achievements, he would point to furlough and he would point to Eat Out to Help Out as proof of what a cool dude he was. What great policies he'd introduced, what great leadership. We now discover that everybody knew that it was ramping up infections, and infections lead to deaths. So everybody knew that his great big pizza party was causing untold problems. And we learnt two things, if Matt Hancock can be trusted, and that, I grant you, is an absolutely stratospheric if. But we learnt that it was brought in without the health department knowing, and I think we have to believe Hancock on that because it would be so easy to prove otherwise. And we learnt that when it became clear that it was ramping up infections, they all kept it quiet. And yet Sunak went on to point to it as proof of what a cool dude he was, what a great leader he was, what a stand-up guy he was. So I would like to say, right, you've heard these clips now, give me a call and tell me what you think. But as I explained to you at great length 20 minutes ago, it doesn't work when I do that. If the question is too broad, oddly, you tend not to take a swing at it. But you're welcome to if you want to. I just can't help thinking that Rishi Sunak's coming out of this worse than Matt Hancock, which is an extraordinary achievement. Have a listen to this and then tell me what you think.
WhatsApp from you to Simon Case. Just want to let you know directly, we've had lots of feedback that Eat Out to Help Out is causing problems in our intervention areas. I've kept it out of the news, but it's serious. This is you, Mr. Hancock.
Yes.
Have you told Rishi? And then Mr. Case says again, I don't think he can afford to extend it. And then you, yes, we've told Treasury. We've been protecting them in the comms, and thankfully it hasn't bubbled up.
Yes.
So the position you took was indeed that it was serious, that's your word.
Yes.
That you told the Treasury.
Yes.
But whilst you did so, you protected the Treasury in the news, you concealed your concerns about the seriousness of the impact of this scheme, and you expressed thanks, gratitude, it hadn't come to light.
That's because I abide by collective responsibility. And I was being encouraged by various journalists who would presume that I was against it to criticise the then Chancellor. But I believe that government is a team effort. And so I didn't want that to become a row in public. I mean, you can see during the whole pandemic the corrosive effect of leaks. I was not part of that, and I don't appreciate government by leak, and hence I abided by collective responsibility on and off the record. That's what I'm saying there.
26 minutes after 11 is the time. So I don't know that we can state with certainty that a family member or you yourself caught it as a consequence of Eat Out to Help Out, or God forbid that if Eat Out to Help Out hadn't happened, then a loved one might still be alive. But I need help in getting into this inquiry more effectively. I keep reading the revelations, and we do a catch-up with Charlotte or with Henry or with Helen, and then we move on to something else. We don't actually talk to each other about it, and I really want to. I really want to talk to you about it. I want you to talk to me about it. But there's such a presentation of information. It's such a constant churn of information. It's really hard to pick a moment. So let's just pick this moment now. Matt Hancock kept the news about the spike in infections caused by Rishi Sunak's Eat Out to Help Out. He kept it out of the media. He kept the details out of the news because he thought that was the right thing to do. Who looks better now, Matt Hancock or Rishi Sunak? 0345 6060 973. Fred's in Aylesbury. Fred, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Yeah, I, a bit like you, I'm conflicted in some degree on this because I agree with Matt Hancock generally that
really?
Collective responsibility.
Oh, yes, sorry, you're just on this issue. Of course, I'll let you finish. I'm allowed to do a little high-pitched, really.
Yeah, that's fair enough. No, on the issue of collective responsibility, I generally agree that that's an important thing in government, especially in times of a pandemic, in the sense that you've got to try and give a consistent message, not confuse people, so on and so forth, etc. So, in principle, collective responsibility is a good thing. In this case, however, collective responsibility did not extend in both directions. It did not extend from Sunak and Johnson, who did not discuss it on a collective basis within cabinet. And that being the case, I think that collective responsibility has already been discarded by Johnson and Sunak, as a result of which the pressure upon Hancock and his good principles about collective responsibility, I think, should be called into greater question.
You're going full A-level politics on this, aren't you?
Well, yeah, I think the problem is in this kind of thing, the government, they were in a difficult position. And there's something else to say on that. I listened to Jill Rutter last night on Peston, and she was saying that there's a structural problem in Downing Street anyway, and I think that's probably true. And this was a fairly new government and not a lot of experience, etc., etc. Well, whose fault was there? Was it that there was not a lot of experience? Johnson purged out all the experience so that he didn't have anyone.
Cummings was advertising for weirdos and misfits, wasn't he?
Well, you don't have a problem necessarily with people coming in with different ideas, but I do have a problem with purging out people purely on the basis that they did not wholly buy into the Brexit pipe dream. They took all the experience out, and the result was we had a cabinet that was inexperienced, was like a rabbit in the headlights. And the last thing to say on that whole issue is that we did not react as badly as other... say that again. We did not react as well as other countries. So this whole, it's it's once in a 100 years thing, and it wasn't difficult. Sorry, disagree.
A lot of it doesn't wash. There's two. You're picking up on the other element there. They're all admitting, or almost all of them. I don't think Johnson will when he appears, that they should have gone earlier. Hancock trying to have his cake and eat it. It busted yesterday, really, for coming close to telling what appeared to be porkies. I like your thinking. I wasn't being facetious when I said A-level politics. I was just reminded of my A-level politics when we used to have conversations and debates about precisely where collective cabinet responsibility began and ended. Often in the case of I think Michael Heseltine over the Westland case and some other examples as well. But if he wasn't told about it, I don't think
collective responsibility.
No, I don't think that's true. I don't think that absolves him of responsibility to defend it, except that the requirement of collective cabinet responsibility is that it is a cabinet decision.
Yeah, exactly. And there are times, such as in wartime, when an immediate response is required, where cabinet responsibility may not be possible. Eat Out to Help Out was not one of those issues.
I suppose the question simply is, does it wash? Thank you, mate. That's a nice start. Does it wash? So you're the Secretary of State for Health. You are handed information that the Chancellor of the Exchequer's flagship scheme has caused a huge upsurge in COVID-19 infections, and you, by your own admission, in messages that you didn't think would be made public, you help keep it out of the news. You help keep it out away from the public. I don't know if that is covered by collective cabinet responsibility, but I do want to know what you think about it. 11:31 is the time. Lottie Morley's here now with your headlines. 25 to 12 is the time. I'm in that zone where it's like I've got a lump of clay in front of me, and the wheel is spinning, and it's almost a vase, and then it just collapses in on itself and becomes a lump of clay again. Something big here. I think I might have just found some of the help that I need in getting the vase up and running. Because Eat Out to Help Out. Can I read you something that I wrote at the time, if you don't mind? This is on October the 6th, 2020. I wrote, do you think that offering people cash incentives to pile en masse into places proven to carry a high risk of infection against a backdrop of confused and confusing guidance might have contributed to a surge in infections? And then I added, as is my wont on Twitter, bit pishy rishi. That prompted an article, bizarrely, in the Daily Telegraph a couple of days later, in which a restaurateur relayed that he'd challenged my claim that the Eat Out to Help Out had obviously caused a spike in infections. It was a perfectly good-natured exchange, so I won't, although it was a bit odd of him to go and write an article for the Telegraph, but I won't embarrass him by reminding you who it was. O'Brien had tweeted that the reopening of hospitality, and in particular Eat Out to Help Out, preceded the spike in cases and therefore was the cause. And newspapers like the Telegraph were desperate to undermine or even try to discredit anybody who was making that point. And yet we've discovered today and yesterday that they all knew that Eat Out to Help Out was the cause of a spike in infection. So there's something not right here. It's just struggling to pin down precisely what it is. Also, there's a backdrop of you not caring enough. And I think that's self-protection on the part of humans. I think it's over now, thank God. I don't really want to go back into the weeds of it. I don't know. 11:37, Andy's in Lee. Andy, what would you like to say about the collective cabinet responsibility? Does Matt Hancock for once find himself on firm moral ground here?
Hi, James. No, if I'm honest, I don't think it washes with me. I think it talks to maybe the sort of systematic decline of expectations we've got from our politicians, really. The fact that we're even having this conversation. So we're in a position where he knew that either backing this policy or not speaking out against it was going to cause people to die. And at no point did he feel that, that was preferable over not backing.
Well, listen, I'm Matt Hancock for the purposes of this exchange, and I'm going to resist furiously any attempt to extend it. Therefore, what is to be gained by publicly revealing the proven links between infection and Eat Out to Help and Rishi Sunak's flagship scheme?
I just think, morally, where does he stand?
You feel like we deserve to know, don't you?
It's a national crisis unknown since the Second World War, and we're now sat down discussing whether or not somebody was right to keep information from the public, which and a policy where knowingly cases were rising and deaths were caused off the back of it. I think that there's a perception with Hancock particularly that he's a busy idiot. And he was sort of led up the garden path by Sunak and Johnson to some degree, but this is a knowing decision to back his mate and not have him face too much criticism.
That's the weird thing, is that Cummings clearly hated Hancock, and Hancock clearly hated Cummings. And Johnson, one of the best things here, in the middle of this exchange at the beginning of March 2020, Johnson's blowing smoke up Boris Johnson's bum. Johnson's blowing smoke up Hancock's bum, and then in the middle of this exchange, Johnson writes, "I'm off to the rugby now." And Matt Hancock replies, "Excellent, enjoy." So when he says collective cabinet responsibility, under your reading, what he's really saying is sort of keeping everything sweet.
Inside the boys' club, nobody speaks out against anyone else. To hell with the consequences. And if Richie thinks that he wants to do this, then I'll back him regardless of the facts that I know it's going to cause some people to die. That's these are real consequences. Although they may only ended up being numbers to Hancock on a spreadsheet. These were real people.
How big a deal is it? I ban myself from asking that question on the radio because it's such a lazy exercise. But sometimes I can't get away from it. How big a deal is this? Are we missing something? Is the collective cabinet responsibility a red herring, or does it diffuse the potential bombshell? It just seems to me to be a really important moment that they knew it had caused deaths. Sunak denied it even as he was being told that it happened, and Hancock colluded to keep it out of the newspapers, to keep it out of the media.
Yeah, I think it's a huge deal. I think it's going to be interesting as to what the consequences are at the end of the inquiry. Obviously, the fact that Hancock is now no longer part of government, then
Johnson's no longer part of government, and what's his chops has even gone on to be Prime Minister. It's a weird one, right? I found the clip that I wanted now as well, which comes from October, looking at the question of whether or not it might have. Well, you have a listen because they knew. So Hancock has told us now that they knew that this had happened, but that he helped to keep it out of the newspapers. And here is Rishi Sunak in October of 2020 being asked about it.
I wonder if we could talk about Eat Out to Help Out, a scheme that many people took advantage of, and I must admit that I certainly did myself. But do you accept, as the Prime Minister did at the weekend, that Eat Out to Help Out might have contributed to the spread of COVID-19?
I'm not sure that's exactly what the Prime Minister said. He said in general, insofar as hospitality is a source of transmission, that's why we should make sure we focus our attention on it to suppress the spread of the virus, which is why there are things like table service only, the curfew, etc. in place. But I think more broadly, if you think of the spread of the virus this time around, what's happening here is pretty much in sync with what's happening around the world in second waves, whether it's France or Spain, where very specifically our scientists said we were following exactly the same curve. So actually there seems to be more a feature just of the virus and the season than anything specific. And then on the scheme itself, if you look at where it was used almost the most in reference to the size of the population, the Southwest probably stands out. And indeed the Southwest today is the region with some of the lowest COVID incidences anywhere in the country.
Public Health England data also shows between the 14th of August and the 20th of September, eating out was the most commonly reported activity in the 2 to 7 days prior to symptom onset. Correlation, perhaps not causation. But if you look at Manchester, their case numbers were 32.5 per 100,000. The week ending the 27th of September, that number was over 200 per 100,000. The week of the 2nd of October, it was over 500. You can't say for certain 100% that this scheme didn't contribute.
I think we were having a conversation before about data science, and you said it there. There's a big difference between correlation and causation. So I would be, I guess, cautious about jumping to simplistic conclusions. There's also different data, which also using Public Health England data, which hospitality industry has also analysed, and that showed a very small percentage of hospitality being a cause for transmissions. I think one thing we know is, and actually I speak to our scientists almost every day, it's incredibly difficult at such a granular level to pinpoint exactly the cause of transmission. And so I think we should have some humility about our ability to do that. Do we know in general that social contact is a cause of transmission? Of course we do. But that can also happen inside households. And whether in the Midlands, where we've seen before, that was identified as the key source of transmission was household mixing inside homes. So it is going to be different depending on where you are in the country. The exact source of the virus spread will vary. And that's why our response can be targeted and nuanced to the situation we confront.
And yet, Matt Hancock told the inquiry yesterday, or rather in a WhatsApp to Simon Case, the Permanent Secretary at Number 10, in August, so 2 months before that interview Rishi Sunak's giving there. Eat Out to Help Out is causing problems in our intervention areas. I've kept it out of the news, but it's serious. Telling Case not to allow the economic success of the scheme to lead to its extension. So Sunak, even 2 months later, is denying that it was a problem, even as we're learning this week that the reasons why it wasn't extended further was because everybody knew it was a problem. And this radio presenter still can't find the bead he needs to get into this issue properly. I can't just say, this is a really big deal. Why don't you care more? But I really want to. It is 11:47 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So I've still not got my vase up and running. The wheel is spinning. My hands are all wet. I need Patrick Swayze, don't I, to sort of stand behind me and help me mould it into a proper vase. I feel I've got all of the constituent parts in place. Quite a niche little aside, that, if you haven't seen the film Ghost. I watched Footloose the other night, the original of Footloose with one of my daughters. That's an absolute stone-cold classic. Stands the test of time like few would believe. I digress slightly. I've got all the constituent parts are there, but they don't yet seem to create something that's bigger than the sum of its parts. Sunak, in October of 2020, denying that Eat Out to Help Out caused a spike in infections. Matt Hancock's exchanges with Simon Case proving that they knew it was causing a spike in infections. And any doubt removed by the knowledge the reason why they didn't do it again or extend it was because they all knew. And yet, Sunak's in Downing Street. Sacha Lord, hello. Sacha Lord is still a nighttime advisor to, nighttime advisor sounds a bit odd. It's like you're giving recommendations of where you can go for a curry in Whalley Range, but he's not. He's an economic nighttime advisor to Andy Burnham, the Mayor of London. I can't remember what happened in Manchester, but why have you rung in, Sacha?
Well, I rang in basically because I felt completely fooled on this.
Go on.
When I remember the image or the video of Sunak coming out, and I think he was serving someone a piece of chicken in a restaurant with a name badge on.
Yeah, that's right.
And at the time, I thought, do you know what, James? This is fantastic for the industry. It's going to save businesses. Yeah. It's going to save jobs. And in fact, as Andy Burnham's advisor, it's one of the few occasions where we didn't disagree, but I was saying to Andy, look, this is great to your advice. This is fantastic for hospitality. And he said, well, I think the money could have been spent better elsewhere. And I feel completely fooled now because I honestly thought, well, to do something so drastic, they've taken advice from the scientists and they've looked at it and studied it. And we now know that wasn't the case. And it most definitely did spread the virus.
Oh, wow. So you went ahead with it. You would have had to anyway, wouldn't you? It wasn't a regional decision to be taken.
No, it was a national decision.
But you were confident and comfortable with it because you presumed that they'd done what I suppose lawyers would call due diligence.
Well, you'd think they'd do the homework, wouldn't you? To reopen somewhere up and say, OK, you can all go back out again. It was like, well, hooray, this is great.
What are you more shocked by? The fact that the Secretary of State for Health knew nothing about it and it appears to have just been conjured up in Rishi Sunak's fever dreams, or the fact that the Secretary of State for Health, and we'll confine ourselves to his testimony because Sunak hasn't given his yet, or the fact that when the stats came in and it was clear that there was a link between Eat Out to Help Out and a spike in infections, the Secretary of State for Health helped keep it out or sought successfully to keep it out of the news?
the whole thing's just been a circus.
Hasn't
and we're
it?
seeing time and time again how many policy decisions have been incorrect. I was the one, James, that took Hancock to the High Court.
Of course.
And got them to drop the 10 p.m. curfew and the ridiculous Scotch egg ruling as well.
Yes.
And everybody knew if you push hundreds of thousands of people out at the same time at 10 o'clock, what's going to happen with spreading the virus, transport falls down. So this is a catalogue of errors. And I'll be honest, James, I'm not watching the inquiry this week because it just angers me so much.
Well, that leads me to a question I wasn't going to ask you, actually, but I will now, because you almost proved the point I was making a few moments ago, is that it feels as if it is simultaneously important and unimportant. So the stuff that's coming out is really, really important, but you're not even going to bother watching it because it's not going to lead anywhere, is it?
It's going to, again, we're wasting millions and millions and millions. And I watched Andy Burnham on Monday. I did watch that thing, and Steve Rotherham as well.
Right.
And to see that they actually said, basically, let's give Greater Manchester a kicking.
Yeah.
Now, how disgusting is that? It's appalling. It really, really is. So I can't watch it. And, to see these people dragged in and start infighting.
I was the same, but I wasn't involved in hospitality like you are, but I just remember thinking, this sounds a bit rum, but they wouldn't do it unless it was safe.
Exactly.
And they had no idea it was safe, and then when they found out that it wasn't, they all went stum.
Yeah, exactly.
But finally, Sasha, why do you think it's not... Did you know what I mean about I don't know how much you've been listening today, about me not being able to turn this big lump of wet clay into a vase? It's as if the events in front of us unfolding, and the fact that you've looked away today is almost proof of the point I'm making. We've got all the constituent parts of something that should feel truly scandalous, and yet somehow it doesn't.
I don't think we're shocked anymore, James.
Is that what it is?
The most fined street in the whole of the UK during that period was Downing Street.
Yeah.
We know about the suitcases full of wine, the parties, the broken swing. It doesn't shock us anymore. And it feels to me as if they're just treading water now until the next election. They know what's coming.
Aye.
And I welcome it. I welcome the new government.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, no, I hear you. And fair play for sticking that in at the end. But that idea that we've reached... Thank you, Sasha. Sasha Lord, the nighttime economy advisor to the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, there, sharing that even in those levels of negotiation, so not just some gob on a stick sharing his thoughts with you on the radio, but at high-level negotiations in government, you have people saying, well, they wouldn't do it unless they knew it was safe, and yet we found out, A, they didn't know it was safe, and B, it wasn't. It's a weird one, this. Is Sasha right? Is it just the shock? We've sort of run out of road. Where do we go now? It's a bit like Steve Bannon flooding the zone with shocking amounts of sewage. And then you just don't know where to... What do you do? I mean, but he's Prime Minister now. It's just bizarre to me, this. I've never known anything quite like it. Sam's in Cardiff. Sam, what would you like to say?
Hi there. I've got 2 points. The first one, with sort of what, sticking together, I completely get that in most businesses and certainly in government, especially in time of crisis.
Yes.
But the reason for them sticking together at this stage, from what Matt Hancock is saying, was probably not to scare the public.
Yes.
On the basis that the majority of their campaign up until then and after that was to scare the public into complying with what the current restrictions were, if you could understand them.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to make sense. The second point that I want to make is no one would possibly think that putting lots of people together in a restaurant or anywhere else wasn't going to increase numbers, which leads me to think, well, did they want to increase numbers during the summer where numbers generally would be lower, from what I understand, because of the weather and because people were generally more outside, in order to then be able to use it to force compliance because the numbers were so high, and then force a lockdown possibly before Christmas, because at one stage all that they wanted to do was allow us to see our family at Christmas.
So there's almost, you're confusing the issue still further, really, aren't you? So you can see some sense in what Hancock was doing, and yet at the same time the broader direction of government appears to have been realming into or veering into the realms of the fantastical, almost as well. If we cross our fingers hard enough, maybe the bad stuff won't happen. It happened in a week, didn't it? We went from sort of going, well, this looks great. The government wouldn't do it unless they let us, unless they knew it was safe. And then the figures went up. I don't know that I buy the idea that it was responsible to keep it quiet. I'd really like to have known at the time.
I completely agree. It absolutely wasn't sensible or responsible to keep it quiet. But then that makes me think, is there something more untoward or slightly darker undertones to it? But then that question is mitigated by the text messages, where they're sort of hushing it up in a way that it seems to be a surprise to them, although not to anyone else, that the numbers were going up.
Who do you believe, Sam, in all of this? Because Cummings is defending Cummings, Hancock is defending Hancock, Sunak and Johnson, no doubt, next will defend Sunak and Johnson. Who do you think is coming out of this with credibility intact?
I don't think any of them have got any credibility at all. I mean, and again, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, but Cummings did seem to come up with more credible stuff than a lot of the politicians, but then I wouldn't ever have judged him as anywhere near credible with anything he said up until seeing him at the inquiry.
Yeah, and of course he's absolutely furious about everything. So everything he does, he's providing almost a red button commentary on Hancock's testimony, which is still continuing. I think Charlotte Lynch is watching it for us, so that we'll be able to catch up a little later. Thank you, Sam. Last word on this, I think, to Lloyd, who's in Neasden. It's a weird one, Lloyd. What's your take?
I don't know. I haven't really got a take on it, because I thought loads of stuff was really mad. But at the time, I remember me and a couple of friends thinking, why have they just said people have to come and eat? You can't get a takeaway. Yeah. You know, loads of restaurants that used to do takeaways, they weren't doing it. You had to come inside and sit down and eat. And I thought, I'm not going to sit down with a load of coughing and spluttering people. I'll cook my own stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Did you? Because I went out. I can't remember whether I think I'd already had it by then, but I had a bit of a break. But I wonder whether we all just needed it. Whether they actually made a calculation that vulnerable people are unlikely to go and do it anyway. So the people who go will not be the vulnerable ones, and therefore people will catch it, but it won't be serious cases.
But I thought, but what about the people who don't want to catch it but do want to grab a meal? Why can't it be like you can actually get a takeaway?
You're a bit hung up on the takeaway thing, Lloyd. I think, it's 2 or 3 years ago now. You've had enough takeaway since to make up for the gap in your diet that was caused during that particular period, I hope.
No, but at the time, I just remember at the time thinking...
The logic of it. If it's all right to all go and sit down and start licking each other's faces in Wagamama, then why the heck can't I get a Deliveroo? I hear you, Lloyd. Thank you, mate. If I'd known at the time, just to close down any attempts at levity that I just undertook with Lloyd there, Ian in Plymouth has been in touch. If I'd known at the time, I wouldn't have fallen out with my father and stepfather over it. They're both dead now, James. And there, Ian just gets to the heart of it, to this failure at the moment to understand why these astonishing revelations about one of the most difficult periods that we'll ever go through as a population, it's astonishing revelations of extraordinary incompetence and dishonesty at the very heart of the decision-making process, are not landing with the weight that you might have expected them to. And I'm not having a go at you, because I'm not feeling it either. That might be part of the problem. If I'm not feeling it fully, and as Sasha Lord said a moment ago, it's because we've been rendered unshockable by events. We're so used to being shocked by how shockingly awful everything was that it's ceased to be shocking. It's become unshockingly awful. The shocking has become unshockingly awful. And if I'm not communicating that to you, then the weird thing that's unfolding in front of us is unfolding. It's a heck of a lot of pressure then on the chair of the inquiry, isn't there? Because she's going to have to knit all of this together at the end in a way that not only reflects what's happened, but also reflects the severity and profundity of it all. 3 minutes after 12. Should we do a Friday 12 o'clocker? Should we do something that's not quite as heavy duty? Well, nothing's as heavy duty as the Israel-Gaza scenario, but even the COVID-19 inquiry, which is also, although easy to overlook perhaps, also a tale of life and death. I just got my eye caught by this headline this morning in the Telegraph. It said, home sellers must disclose nasty surprises. Nasty surprises in quotes. And it means that you will have to confess to plights and blights. That's my phrase. I quite like that phrase. Plights and blights that may dismay the purchaser of your home. So someone comes to buy a house off you and you don't tell them something, and you know that when they discover it, they're going to be absolutely gutted, up to and including the point at which they wouldn't have bought the house in the first place. Now, the actual stuff that National Trading Standards has told estate agents that they need more details of can be a little bit dry. The plan is designed, and thank you to everybody who's expressed concern about my voice this morning. Obviously, I'm in the foothills, or I don't know which side of the foothills I'm on. I don't know whether I'm on my way up to a worse infection, I feel better than I did yesterday, or whether I'm on my way down on the other side of the hill, but I'm once again in the foothills. But you never use the phrase foothills in the context of egress, do you? You only use the word foothills in the context of ingress. But I think I'm getting better. I could be wrong. So my apologies if it's irritating you. I promise you it's irritating me more. So the idea is that chains collapse, sales collapse when the purchaser finds out something that has not been revealed or surrendered by the seller. And it means that would-be buyers lose money on surveys and legal fees. If you told me up front that was in place in the thing I was thinking of buying, then I wouldn't have gone ahead with the purchase. I wouldn't have commissioned the survey. I'd have pulled out in the first place. But you're not telling me because you're crossing my fingers and hoping that you won't notice. So it's quite dry and serious, this story, but I'm going to hopefully extend it into the wet and silly, if I can, 5 minutes after 12, because I'm just wondering, hand on heart, what the worst thing you can discover is after you've moved into a new place. And it can be rented as well. It doesn't have to be purchased. You can't have like really silly stuff like someone lives there that you didn't. Well, no, actually, I don't want to rule that out. It could happen, couldn't it? You could think you're moving into a flat, particularly rentals, when you're quite wet behind the ears, a bit of a student. You move into a new flat and you're sitting there having breakfast one morning, someone else walks in and sits down. And you've moved into a flat without realising that you've got a flatmate. So that would be on the list. What is the worst thing you can discover about a new home after you've moved into it? All right, 0345 6060 973. But it has to be something that's actually happened. So I don't want anyone theorising. You moved into a new home. Obviously, I've got much more sympathy for you if you'd bought it than if you'd rented it, because you're tied a lot more tightly to the property, aren't you? But you moved into a new home and you couldn't believe that the landlord or the seller had not told you about this thing that you discovered after you'd moved in. We had an incredibly lucky escape. I will also allow lucky escapes. I'm just trying to think what might be on this list. Sort of, bats in the belfry. We had an incredibly lucky escape. We looked around a house on an estate where we ended up living, on an estate where we found another house not long afterwards. And we loved it. And the estate agent was great. And we'd asked about the neighbours, and the neighbours were supposed to be lovely. And we sat in the car afterwards. I think I've told you this before, but it's a really good indication of what I'm looking for today. We were sitting in the car afterwards, getting ready to, working out what our offer was going to be, getting ready to ring the estate agent and put our offer in. And it was only our second property. We were still quite inexperienced and excitable and doing it. And so we literally parked outside. We've waved goodbye to the estate agent who's gone off in his BMW. And we're sitting in the car. I remember the little VW Polo as if it was yesterday, and Mrs. O'Brien and I are, it's quite a romantic moment, isn't it? This is going to be our family home. This is where, I think, was she pregnant with our first child? I think she may have been. Or certainly we were thinking of starting a family, and it needed an upstairs and a garden, and we could, this is so exciting. And we're literally sitting in the street outside the home we were about to buy, when the sash window on next door is thrown open, and two pit bulls, or I think they were pit bulls, two pit bulls jumped out of the window, defecated, and jumped back in again. Now, two things. Number one, incredibly well-trained dogs, I thought. Number two, don't want to live next door to them. Don't want to live next door to them at all. But for that, and it's unlikely, isn't it, if you trained your dogs to defecate in your front garden and then jump back in again, it was unlikely that you were going to be nominated for any Neighbours of the Year award. And this was a terrace, a terrace of little Victorian workmen's cottages. So, yeah, if the wind was blowing in the right direction, you could hear what other people were having for tea. You could certainly smell it. So it was a very close by scenario. And that was it. That was the point. We literally, I did this thing. I don't know whether you do this or in your relationship, which one it is that always tries to put a gloss on things. So I'm thinking, oh no, we can't go back to the drawing board and look. I say it's not that bad. And Mrs. O'Brien is going, they've just defecated all over the front garden. You can't. I'm not sitting. What are you going to? This would be next door. So we got there in the nick of time. Now, obviously, neighbours are a wonderful example of something that you would really, really, really want to know about before you moved into a property. You can't go round at 10 o'clock at night and see whether or not the lad upstairs has got his bass cranked up to 11 like a Spinal Tap tribute act before you decide to whether you're actually going to take that room or put an offer in on that property. So we'll take that. Some of the more grown-up stuff includes flooding risks, even a poor mobile phone signal or no broadband. That's all a bit dry. I'm looking for stuff that's a little bit more eyebrow-raising than that. And also, the winners this hour will be the people who present something that none of us thought we'd hear today. Do you see what I mean? That you'd have, you go, oh my days, that's not an occupational hazard. So dodgy neighbours. I mean like the truly unexpected. I like this already. We bought a house from a couple who were building a house on the land next door. They neglected to tell us that the electricity from our shed was connected to their garage, and we only discovered this a year later when an electrician pointed it out. So that means I thought you were going to tell me the whole house had been wired up so that you would be paying their electricity bill as well as your own. I want more than spiders. Sorry, Hazel. I'm sure it was absolutely horrible for you. Ooh, black mold. No, it's got to be something funny. It's got to be something that makes the rest of us go, oh my days. Either you had a lucky escape or it was something truly, truly hideous. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. The listings should also include an accurate description or statement as to the nature of the mobile signal and coverage available at the property, including any known issues or restrictions. Has anyone ever done that? Have you ever sort of pulled out of a house purchase because the mobile phone signal was bad? You can tell I've lived in a city for 30 years. I don't have the capacity to understand what that would be like almost, but I can see why it would make a difference to your decision to carry on. You could trigger a complaint against the agent if it didn't happen, and that meant that in the event of you pulling out of the purchase, the agent could become responsible for a payment. So home sellers must disclose nasty surprises before pressing ahead with a purchase. I'm going to include landlords and renters in this, and what I'm really looking for, and I don't want to sound, well, I do want to sound a bit strict on this. It has to be a surprise. So quite a lot of stuff is not going to be that surprising. It's unlucky and it's nasty, but the bigger the surprise, the better the call. Okay? 0345 6060 973. Adam's in Solihull. Adam, what was the nasty surprise?
Well, James, if you want a nasty surprise, I don't think anything gets better than this.
Go on. I'll be the judge of that.
I purchased the property via auction.
Yeah.
Just outside Durham. And I didn't have a chance to go and see the property, so I relied on the pictures that were in the auction pack. And the pictures are online. And in particular, when we do investment properties, we choose properties that we think that the least amount of work's required. So anyway, the auction was on the 6th of September 2023.
Right. Oh, this is a box-fresh story then.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I completed an exchange on the 4th of October. A week after the property, I did a site visit, couldn't get in with the key, looked through the window. The house had been set on fire from the inside. We had to get the fire. Yeah, we had to get, one of the neighbours came out and told us what happened. Someone had gone in and broke in and then set the house on fire from the inside. But what actually happened is there'd been a break-in. They'd stripped the whole of the upstairs and downstairs of all the radiators, all the copper pipes, and then as a parting gift, set fire to the porch.
And that had spread into the house, or was it just the?
It's just the front room, fortunately. But the level of damage, it was just unexplained. It was
are you insured for that?
No, because what happened was.
You sound very cheerful, Adam. Considering
James, it's one of those things. What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do?
I don't know.
So when we contacted the Durham Fire Station, they said that incident had taken place on the 5th of September, the day before the auction.
Yeah.
So our research, I contacted my solicitor. We raised it with the seller solicitors. They claimed that they were unaware of what happened. Likelihood is they weren't.
Yeah.
But the fact remains is that we bought a property from an auction that did not look or match the description of the property in the auction. The shame of the matter is, even if we'd attended the viewing, which was a week prior to the auction, it would have been in decent nick. But
so you buy it sight unseen, do you, I suppose? Or you did? So no one's liable for this except you?
Unfortunately, yeah.
Well, I feel for you. How much are you out for? Do you know?
It's a fair bit, James. It's a fair bit. You talk about between 15 and 20 grand just on a structural.
What is that? Is that 10% of the property value, or?
No. Do you know what? It's an area of the UK where properties are not that expensive.
Well, that's what I mean. That's why I said 10%. But it's cheaper than that, is it? So it's like a 90 grand house.
Yeah.
50.
It's a decent percentage of the house value.
What did you pay for it?
I can't disclose on the radio.
Of course you can.
I can't.
Why not?
I'm an investor. Sorry, James. I can't do that.
Well, this is ridiculous. Of course you can.
No, I'm not going to, James.
Answer the question. I need you to do what Nadine Dorries does. When Ian Dale interviews Nadine Dorries and she goes, I can't tell you who it was. I can't tell you who it was. I can't tell you who it was. It was Donald Duck.
I did tell. I gave you a percentage, and you were pretty accurate with your estimate. So the thing is that for anyone who's listening,
why are you being so coy though? Because you don't want other people to know what a sweet bit of business you've got going on there.
No, it's not at all. It's just
no one knows where it is. No one knows who you are. No one knows you from Adam. James,
the house cost 40 grand.
Thank you. I did it. Look at that. My interrogation skills. So, but it's not funny though, because you're looking at more than 25, 30%.
Do you know what? It's. Oh. Do you know when I was listening to your show and you said I want it to be as colourful as possible? I was like, well, nothing's going to get. I'm going to send your producer the pictures and the images now.
I will look forward to it.
And you'll have a look.
So this is quite an early leader. We've got a very early leader. What's the nastiest surprise you can get when you buy a new property? It's burnt down, James.
I don't think anyone's going to bet that. But let's see. I'm listening to your show. Challenge has been set. I'll send you the pictures and videos, James, all right?
You're probably right. But, I mean, to be fair, it was still standing. So the winner now would have to turn up on it. It's not funny. I mean, obviously, no one got hurt or anything like that. It's actually been burnt to the ground. There's literally no house left. What's the nastiest surprise you got when you bought a new house? I went round there with my kid. There was no house. Adam, you're a star, mate, and thanks for playing. It's 12:16. It is 19 minutes after 12. Adam in Solihull has set the bar high, but you don't have to go higher. The question is, as home sellers are ordered to disclose nasty surprises when conducting a transaction, I just wondered, what is the nastiest surprise you have got when you move into a new home? So you don't have to have bought it. You can be renting. The nastiest surprise or the biggest surprise you got upon moving into a new home. And we're being a bit strict on this. So, stuff like damp and unpleasant though it is, it's not really a massive surprise. I mean, like you opened a door and it was bricked up or it was a sheer drop to 2 stories below. That would count as a surprise. But damp is what you might call an occupational hazard of property purchases. Ryan's in Liverpool. Ryan, what have you got?
Hi, James. It's not as bad as a burnt-down house, I give you that. But me and my partner bought our first home, and when we had 3 visits before we ended up buying it. Yeah. When we turned up, each time, the lady would greet us with they had kind of an external front porch. She would greet us. There'd be a radio in the front porch. Doors would be open. And as we'd go through each room, there would be a radio.
Oh, yeah.
I thought, okay, that's a bit... I've never seen that before, a radio in every single room. I since learned that the reason she had a radio in every single room was because next door would constantly be screaming and arguing with each other 24/7.
So it must have been quite loud, the radio.
Oh, it was. It was like full volume. I just put it down to it was an elderly-ish woman.
Oh, she saw you coming. She saw you coming, didn't she? Eh?
But that's not it.
Go on.
So the front porch that we talked about. That ended up being, it was built on false foundations, I believe, and it was leaning forwards, and it needed to come down, and that cost us in the region of about £5,500. So the front door was always open.
Oh, that's why she...
And when we moved in, the first day we got the keys and we turned up and we put the key in the door, you had to jimmy the door to kind of lift it and push it because the door didn't fit the frame.
So she knew what she was doing.
And that's not it. Well, the shower, she said, we bought a new shower 18 months ago.
Yeah.
So we thought, we don't want an electric shower, we want a thermostatic one. So we got a new shower. When the guy comes to build and fit the shower, he said, you've actually got dry rot. And if they've had a shower within the last 18 months, they'd have known you had dry rot because this is extreme. So we had to get the whole thing treated.
I don't want to turn this into a kind of old school 30 years ago LBC DIY phoning, but surely the surveyor should have picked up on lots of this stuff.
Well, we were told via the solicitors that because the shower was fitted within the last 18 months, they took it on good faith that everything was fine.
So she was a right old scally.
Oh, yeah. I'd be here all day. If I told you everything, we'd be here till
you've given me
the
biggest highlight is the neighbour, probably, because she'd gone to such clever trouble to get the radios all cranked up.
Oh, she wasn't, as you said, she saw us coming. She wasn't silly.
That's quite fun. But you sound quite upbeat. Was this a while ago now?
2.5 years ago. We're still going.
Are you still in it?
Oh, yeah, we're still in it.
Are the neighbours still
Just
arguing?
had a new kitchen fitted.
Are the neighbours...
Oh, they're still arguing. All day, every day. And I don't know what it's about, because surely they've run out of things to argue about now.
Oh, no, you don't say that. I'm a radio phoning host, mate. I don't like the idea of people running out of things to argue about. 23 minutes after 12 is the time. Mark's in Norfolk. Mark, what have you got?
Hi, James.
Before you continue, what are we going big on? Nasty or surprise, or a combination of both?
A little bit of both.
Go on,
a little bit of both. You said all the regulations are a bit dry, and I could think of something that was far from dry. So I bought a house. Myself and wife bought a house just under 2 years ago now. House of our dreams, all the usual stuff. Lovely outlook, look through woods. Not surrounded by many neighbours. Little private cul-de-sac. And when we were going through the conveyancing, the seller was, in hindsight, is a little bit tetchy about his septic tank. So we'd moved into the house. Biggest mistake, we never got a septic tank inspection. In hindsight,
right.
There you go. But we'd lived in the house a little while, and I'd opened up the tank, and it had roots in it. So I managed to get those out. But as I'm digging those out...
Just for your house, this tank? It's not a shared tank?
No, just for our house.
Because quite a lot of Norfolk isn't on the sewage main, so...
That's right, that's right.
Okay.
So, some houses have main sewage, some have what they call private drainage. But cut a long story short, we found that the tank, when it's filling up, it was pumping out. And he'd basically rigged a pump with a float switch, which is on the end of that pump was a pipe which went into the back garden, which is great until you've got raw sewage bubbling up through the grass all over the back garden.
And so he knew that he'd done that?
Yeah, there should be a drainage field. What there should be, and he told us
that there was
a whole drainage field.
So how long had you been in the house when you got the raw sewage?
It was probably about 3 months after we'd been in there, and then we started exploring a little bit more. There was mains cables 2 inches underground, buried underground.
So he'd done it all himself?
Yeah.
How much did it cost? Have you got it all sorted?
Well, no. That's the legal argument at the moment. We've had quotes for somewhere between 15 and 20 grand to completely remove it and fit a new drainage field. Biggest concern at the minute is because the old drainage field had obviously collapsed, got roots in it.
Yeah.
That we're not going to be able to get another one put in there. So we're suing him at the moment for the replacement of that whole septic system.
Wow.
But you can't beat a little bit of raw sewage bubbling across the back garden.
I love the smell of raw sewage in the morning. So you're very much in the sights of the national trading standards on this. It's precisely that sort of scenario that,
Exactly. I mean, it's already the case because he filled in a form saying that everything in terms of the drainage worked and complied with all the there's some regulations from about 2000 which govern septic tanks and sewage treatment plants, and he signed it to say that it is all working perfectly. What we're having to go through now is the argument around proving that he
clearly isn't. Man alive. So I mean, a similar sum of money, but not as big a percentage of the overall property as Adam's situation.
No. I mean, you can't beat that one, can you?
I wish everyone would stop saying that. I refuse to ever accept that we've peaked early, certainly with the first call of the hour. But that's a pretty good one as well, because it involves poo. I mean, that always adds to the nastiness and indeed the surprise. Imagine if someone's just tuned in at that moment in time. They probably think we're talking about Thames water. We're not. We're talking about Mark's back garden. Lisa's in Yeovil. Lisa, what have you got?
We've got a body in the garden. We discovered after we'd moved in that someone was buried at the bottom of the garden. I had a weird phone call from someone, and they said, as you know, Dad's buried in your garden. We'd like to come and visit the grave. And I thought, this has got to be a con.
Yeah.
And I managed eventually to get hold of the vendors. And I said, look, what's going on? She said, well, Yeah, it is true, actually, but the estate agent said it might put you off, so we didn't mention it.
So you can get a council... You are allowed to bury family members on your own property.
I think you have to have permission, but
yes, with the
didn't.
correct permission from the council.
Yeah, but they didn't. Nobody knew about it, and the water table was way above.
Oh no!
The other level. So, well, I mean, there's nothing I could do about it. But on the other hand, if we were planting trees and things, we could have easily dug the body up, and then, oh God!
Well, it doesn't. But how long ago was this?
Oh, well, this was about 17 years ago.
Are you still in the same property?
Yeah.
And do they still come and visit?
No, nobody's interested.
Oh, that's a bit poignant.
Dad didn't even live here. I don't know why they put him down there.
What?
No, I mean, it was just.
Well, you live and learn, eh? I mean, I cried. And was the estate agent right? Would it have put you off? Do you think if you'd known?
Probably not.
No?
Really.
Okay.
But I think I should have been told.
Yes, I agree. You definitely should have been told. Well, there you go. I don't know. I think that is at least a contender for knocking Adam off the top spot this morning, and there was everybody else thinking that we'd peaked early. It was in the garden, I suppose. So without being too morbid, it is possible to conceive of a story that might possibly top that, but I don't want to tempt fate. It is. Thank you, Lisa. What a lovely tale, so to speak. It is 28 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Let's Nick's in Wood Green. Nick, what have you got?
Oh yeah, hi.
James.
It's
James, Nick. It's James.
Sorry, I'm just turning off the TV.
That's all right, mate. What, the TV? Why have you got the TV on when you're waiting to come on national radio?
Because often you end up waiting for like 25 minutes and never getting through. So
not on this show, mate. We're knocking them out of the park every 30 seconds. Go on, what do you want to say?
Okay. I ended up moving into renting a flat where Dennis Nielsen used to live. And no one mentioned it. The estate agent and the landlady never mentioned it. And I only found out because people were turning up outside doing the knowledge, on mopeds with a clipboard.
Yeah, and it was a sort of local landmark.
And I buttonholed one of the guys and said, "What's going on? Why did everyone keep stopping you?" He said, "Oh, notorious addresses in London, mate. This is Dennis Nielsen's old gaff."
And he was in that flat when he embarked upon his killing spree, was he?
Well, luckily, because obviously I was fairly alarmed. I'd literally just moved in. And I asked the neighbours, the guy upstairs, did he know anything about this? And he said, "Oh, yeah, it's my flat." He said, yeah, it's, I got it at a hell of a discount, he said.
Well, he would have done, wouldn't he? Especially because it was, they found, not to put too fine a point on it, they found body parts in the drains, didn't they, and stuff like that?
That's right. It was fat. It blocked the drains, So, yeah, as nasty surprises go...
Yeah, that's pretty nasty. Yeah, I think, Adam's certainly got competition now. What we'll do now, because we're very clever, is we'll probably have a pause on the morbid stuff before we... If indeed we come back to it at all. But that's 2 for 2 now. We've got a dead body and a serial killer. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:34 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Quite a few of complaints coming in today. I did promise at the top of the show that I had an update on the crime of the century. I don't know if you were listening earlier this week when the Tory mayoral candidate Susan Hall shared the very harrowing tale with Nick Ferrari of her experiences with lost property, which she described as a terrible crime, a robbery no less. Well, the man who reunited the Tory mayoral candidate Susan Hall with her travel card and £40 in cash has now told his story. And, if you thought that this tale of crime and punishment could not get any more serious and profound, then you've got another think coming. So I will share those details with you shortly. But first, Charlotte Lynch has been keeping a close eye and indeed ear on events at the COVID-19 inquiry where Matthew Hancock is still talking.
He is, yeah. He's now answering questions from representatives from groups like the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice. So Hugo Keith KC, the chief counsel to the inquiry, has finished his questioning. It's worth saying there is going to be a whole module of this inquiry on care and care homes. So there wasn't too much focus on that. But I think something that we heard actually yesterday, one of the major bombshells from yesterday, yesterday that came, James, after you were off air, was this influence that Dominic Cummings had, that Matt Hancock says that Dominic Cummings had behind the scenes, the strings that he was able to pull. Of course, we know he was in the ear of the Prime Minister, the former chief advisor to Boris Johnson as he was Prime Minister. We heard in his evidence Dominic Cummings saying that Matt Hancock lied his way through the pandemic. He even accused him of killing people, of being responsible for deaths during COVID. Matt Hancock insisted he is not a liar, despite this picture that was painted, Hugo Keith put to him, not only by Cummings, but by Lord Sedwell, the former head of the Civil Service, and by the former chief scientific advisor, Patrick Vallance, who said he overpromised things and didn't deliver them with nothing to back them up. Now, instead, as I say, he actually spoke of this influence that this malign actor, he called him, Dominic Cummings, was allowed to have on the operation of government.
In February, the Prime Minister's chief advisor decided that he didn't like the Cobra system, that is on the record, and he decided instead to take all of the major daily decisions into his office. And he invited a subset of the people who needed to be there to these meetings. He didn't invite any ministers. He didn't regard ministers as a valuable contribution to any decision-making, as far as I could see in the crisis. A meeting that he ran daily at 8 a.m. He invited some of the right people, but not all of them. He didn't check with me beforehand and clashed it directly with my daily meeting, which was frustrating because we had a daily meeting in the department to feed into the Prime Minister's meeting at 9:15. The reason these meetings are important is because there is a proper government emergency response system, and it was actively circumvented. And in one of these early meetings, the chief advisor said decisions don't need to go to the Prime Minister. Now, that is inappropriate in a democracy. And I saw it simply as essentially a power grab, but it definitely got in the way of organising the response for the period it was in operation.
So the former chief advisor to the Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock, saying was actively getting in the way of the government's response to such a huge pandemic and wanting to take all the power for himself. Cummings posted on X, formerly Twitter, during that evidence, accusing Hancock again of flat out lying to the inquiry. We heard yesterday Matt Hancock claiming he pushed for a lockdown on the 13th of March with the Prime Minister, and we spoke about how there's no evidence for that. Dominic Cummings saying that is just completely untrue.
What's the word I'm looking for? Teflon, is it? But that always makes it sounds like a compliment, Teflon. So he's turned up. He's completely failed to acknowledge that everyone else has basically called him out for being a complete flump. And then he's picked a fight with Dominic Cummings, who's calling him a liar, putting us in the incredible situation of probably thinking that Dominic Cummings is proving a more credible witness than Matt Hancock, and glossing over completely the fact that he's also had his pants pulled down for claiming that he's done something that he has absolutely no proof at all that he's done. But on he presses.
He does press on. And something else I thought was astonishing was Matt Hancock admitting that despite being so cautious from January and, painting this figure of himself banging on the door of government saying, you need to do something about this now, he wasn't actually reading the minutes from Sewage meetings.
Did you not read the minutes?
Later in the pandemic, I took the minutes directly, but at this early stage, I was given a readout from Professor Whitty.
Did anybody know that the Secretary of State for Health was not reading the minutes day in, day out from the sole Scientific Advisory Committee on Emergencies?
I don't know.
The evidence before this inquiry, Mr. Hancock, is that the minutes were deliberately consensus-driven and short. They were quite short.
Yeah.
To enable them to be read by Cabinet Office, DHSC, Civil Contingency Secretariat, Number 10, and so on. But they weren't read by you.
They certainly were when they were presented to me, and they were and they came up and they were reported to me by the CMO, and this is my understanding of the situation at the time.
That's odd, because thinking about it in entirely cynical terms, Hancock must think that admitting he didn't read the Sewage minutes is better for him than saying that he did, which means there's probably stuff in the Sage minutes that he wants to have plausible deniability of knowing, perhaps. I don't know, maybe I've gone a little bit too Kremlin-y on this.
It's an interesting
but
point.
Because what would you do if you were asked if you hadn't read the meetings, and they would never be able to prove that you hadn't, and you just say, of course I read Sage. It's like when Dominic Raab admitted he'd never read the Good Friday Agreement. Yeah. Happy days.
This was February 2020. Again, Matt Hancock was claiming at this time he was insisting more should be done about COVID. Now, today, similarly as well, I talked about how we're going to have a whole module on care homes, but it was touched on by the representative from the Bereaved Families for Justice group, because that is such a huge issue, a very sensitive issue for those people. And again, he's admitted never having seen a crucial document from Public Health England as the Secretary of State for Health from the 24th of February, which was presented to him at the inquiry. And it says there should be no discharges of COVID patients into care homes. This was his response to seeing that document, it appears, for the first time today.
I didn't see this document at the time, but my reading of the document as you presented it to me is that in the case of an outbreak in the care home, then there should be no discharges to that care home. That's my reading of it, but this is a PHE document that I wasn't aware of, so it is as it is. The evidence is there.
A reminder, he was the Secretary of State for Health. He
Did
was
you just throw shade there, Charlotte?
Of course not.
No, absolutely not.
He was also asked about his transgression and how that impacted on public health messaging and the public's following of the rules. Of course, his affair with his advisor, which became public knowledge in, I think it was June or July 2021. And he said that that the people making the rules should follow them. It's something he's acknowledged before, but it was put to him by Hugo Keith Casey. I think it was inevitable that he had to do that. And we've also heard him touch on school closures. Now, he did suggest that ministers should have acted sooner in autumn 2020, in September 2020. If they had, he said schools may not have needed to close in January 2021, but he says that's in hindsight. So he wasn't at that time, he says, in autumn 2020, pushing for more to be done. This collective we, he said, should have done more, but it wasn't. And as a result, thousands of children missed out on crucial hours of education.
It's just a never-ending avalanche at the moment of mixture of revelation, shock, and we kind of knew that but didn't realise quite how bad it was, and very few of the people giving evidence seem to be engaging with the public reaction. Is that a fair way of putting it? There's a strangely anodyne air to proceedings.
It seems with Matt Hancock that it's everybody else is at fault except for him.
There
and he was saying all of the other departments were arguing over this and that, and they weren't listening to me. But me and my department were doing everything that we could. But he keeps pointing to this toxic culture within government. But everything he's saying in this whole row with Dominic Cummings, it is this toxic blame culture that was going on within government whilst we were in the middle of the biggest health crisis in a generation, but everybody pushing the blame onto the other, it seems, and it does appear from this evidence that is what is continuing to happen.
And Boris Johnson went off to the rugby. I don't know if you've seen that part of the exchanges
on the 7th of March 2020, and Matt Hancock said excellent.
It's 12:45. Charlotte Lynch, great job, thank you. Are you across this enormous scoop about Susan Hall? And, crikey, how long have you been a journalist now?
I don't know. Well, I do know, but I don't want to.
Have you ever come across a story as big as this? Like an actual mayoral candidate being robbed on the tube and then having it returned without any money being taken from them?
No, it's quite extraordinary.
Huge. It is huge.
But it's
brilliant. They found the Good Samaritan now who well, I'll recap after this. 12:40. I've just noticed the date. It's December the 1st. Do you remember when I ruined Whamageddon for everybody because I didn't even know about it? Whamageddon is a game that is played. It started on the radio. I don't know who started it. Actually, it wasn't Moyles, was it? I don't think it was. Where you have to avoid hearing Last Christmas by Wham. for as long as possible as you can into December. And I had no idea, so we just played it, I think, on December the 1st. I can't even remember why. We never do that. It's Radio 101 if you're doing a story and you find a vaguely appropriate piece of music to play. We've always managed to steer clear of that, but we did it that day and you were absolutely livid with me, so don't worry. They were playing it in Greg's in Leicester Square yesterday when I popped in for a steak bake, but I don't know whether they were aware of the date, so I won't be doing that again. I just noticed that it's trending on the artist formerly known as Twitter. 12:49 is the time. We'll hear from Adrian in Glastonbury on this very serious conversation about home sellers being compelled to disclose nasty surprises. We're wondering what nasty surprises you may have encountered upon moving into a new home. And then I've got an astonishing update for you on the crime of the century. This is the robbery and pillage of the Tory mayoral candidate Susan Hall on the London Underground recently, a world exclusive that she shared with LBC earlier this week. We have now got an update on that story that is, I tell you what, if you were already reeling from the true horror of Susan Hall's experience, you're in for a roller coaster ride with the latest developments in that story. And then the man who is dominating the front pages of the tabloids today, Ahmed Scobie, is my guest on Full Disclosure. So I'll play you a little clip of that as well. There's something for everybody. We'll start in Glastonbury. Adrian, what happened?
Hi. Okay, hello. James. So 20 years ago, we were a very young family.
Yes.
Viewed a ground floor flat a couple of times, local to us. And the lady could only see us early in the morning, sort of first thing, which was fine. Didn't think anything of it.
Yeah.
The day we moved in, we noticed that we could hear every sound coming from upstairs because there was no soundproofing whatsoever. We could hear every footstep, every knife going in a drawer, everything washing up and up. And then it only took us a couple of days to realise that she was on the game. And there were men coming to and from quite often in the afternoons.
Could she not? How do you know she wasn't an acupuncturist?
Well, we could hear everything, James.
Right. Yeah, it could have been the squeals that people make when the needles are put in.
Yeah, it could have been, but it was her doing the squealing, so she was a lot of needles.
Okay.
And so we discovered quite quickly that she was on the game. So I was lying in bed one night and we could hear everything going on upstairs. And my wife, I was getting more and more wound up. My wife said, "Just ignore it, but I couldn't. I just couldn't."
No, of course you couldn't.
So I decided then we were going back on the market. So we were in there. Well, we lasted about 2 weeks before it went back on the market. And unfortunately, we sort of no, I didn't.
You didn't tell anyone. No, I know. I mean, I don't blame you.
I'm as bad as everyone else.
I know you are. I don't know what I'd have done in the same circumstances. And there's nothing you can do, is there?
No.
Well, I suppose you could have bought her a carpet. You could have bought her a carpet.
Oh, do you know what we were thinking about putting soundproofing in, putting an extra ceiling in to lower the ceiling, and then putting a load of soundproofing in.
It was that
the
noisy.
Cost of it was just astronomical. It was noisy. We could hear everything, James.
Well, how much did you get for it compared to what you paid for it?
Oh, we got the same money. We put it on the market for the same money.
So you lost out on sort of solicitors' fees. And did you go back to the same estate agent, or did you go to a different estate agent?
Well, we told the estate agent, but there was nothing we could do about it. No, I can't remember now, actually. But
what did they say when they said you've only been here 2 weeks? Why are you putting it back on the market? What did you say?
Well, we didn't go back to them to put it on the market. We went back to them to complain, and they just washed their hands of it. There was nothing they could do about it.
I'd say I got offered a job. I've been offered a job in Dubai. You could have said. I've been offered a job because they'd know from the records.
I would have gone anywhere at that point. To get away from it. It was absolutely doing what I did.
Yeah, well, I don't know. There's no. I suppose there is a warning there. Ideally, you want to be checking out. That's a bit like us being parked outside the house when the two pit bulls jumped out of the window and did a poo in the front garden. If you were parked outside the house, like at different times of day, you'd have got an indication that there was some business being conducted upstairs. 12:53. Is the time. So here's a little reminder of the crime of the century, which the London mayoral candidate Susan Hall shared with Nick Ferrari on this radio station earlier this week.
I just did a normal journey, and same thing with lots of people that are pickpocketed or whatever. You just get to the end of your journey and realise that you don't have your oyster or your pass or whatever. And that's what happened to me, and I had no idea where it could have gone. I have very, very deep pockets in my winter coat, which I keep it in, or I kept it in. I will never do that again. I'll lock it in my handbag. It wasn't there. I had on one of the trains that I went on, somebody was fiddling around beside me and pushing and shoving, and I'd assumed that that's where it had gone. But when I got home, because in my Oyster card holder, I've also got my business card, somebody phoned me and said he'd seen somebody sitting on it. Most odd. He'd asked him if it was it. I know, I just don't get it.
Well, Ajiz Andani gets it. He's a retired businessman tracked down by Ross Lydell at the Evening Standard in an act of, frankly, Pulitzer Prize-worthy investigative journalism, and he has told the Evening Standard exactly what actually happened. So the person was ready to get out at Kingsbury, Mr. Andani told the Evening Standard, and his wife had noticed a travel card wallet that appeared to have... Well, I'll let him tell the story. My wife saw that there was some wallet stuck between two seats. We asked him. He looked behind and said, "It's not mine." So we picked it up and found a freedom pass and some money inside. Luckily, there was a business card with a phone number. We got out at Queensbury. I called Susan, but she didn't pick up, so I left a message. She didn't call for a couple of hours, so I called again. She picked up the phone. I told her that we had found this wallet. She was delighted. "I will come over." When we handed it over to her, she was so pleased. The weird bit is that Susan Hall told Nick that the bloke who was sitting on the wallet, the person who found it, the Good Samaritan, in this case Mr. Andani, that there'd been something a bit suspicious about his behaviour or something like that. But Mr. Andani says he was a sober guy. My thinking might be she dropped it and it was stuck in the middle of the seats. She told me she'd got off at Finchley Road. It might have been nobody was sitting there for a while because the train wasn't crowded. Whatever you think, says the man who actually found the wallet, my view was that it was not a pickpocketing. It might be that she lost it. You think? You think? You think? She looked... But what? Sure. You're... Crikey. The person who was sitting there was not looking like a pickpocket. So there you have it. And what was astonishing about that was after she humiliated herself on the radio on Tuesday, I think it was, or Monday, the Conservatives at City Hall in London, here in London, still put out weird little Twitter things claiming that she'd been pickpocketed or she'd been a victim of crime, which was, I mean, very, very odd because Twitter was also awash with pictures of her literally with stuff poking out of her pockets. That's probably the best bit of the whole story. People tracked down photographs of her out on the campaign trail where she had what appeared to be a freedom pass holder poking out of her winter coat pocket. But anyway, there it is. That's the latest update on that story. And here's the latest update on Full Disclosure. My guest this week, Omid Scobie, the journalist responsible for the book that has all of the corners of the British media that obsess about royal reporting throwing their collective toys out of their collective prams.
I only wrote and edited the English version of the book that went to print that we have in front of us now. We, of course, licensed the copyright to that book to France, Italy, Spain, I think, various places, and the Netherlands. All the other editions are correct. So they're still looking into what went wrong. The day it was all breaking, I was in back-to-back interviews, and I'm obviously mildly panicking in the back of my mind because I'm just thinking, like, what the hell happened? And, like, is there anything else in the book? Like, does someone need to go through from start to end? So I was very happy to hear it being removed from the shelves, that it's being rectified, that they're working from the original manuscript, the true manuscript. Listen, these things just don't go to plan. Things don't happen perfectly. Did I think that would be the outcome of this week? No. But what I will say about the names is it's not my exclusive. These are names that have been known on Fleet Street for some time. They've been gossiped about in the press pens on royal engagements. The reason why they're not written is because it's the law here is show and tell. So I can't show that it was them. I can only tell. So I'm missing one element. To me, I had 3 barristers read this book, a really great legal team on top of that. I'm confident and proud of the level of reporting in the book. So anything that has happened outside of that, of course, is frustrating. But I also think, does it really even matter what the names are? Because ultimately, this is about a really serious conversation that happened within the royal institution that was considered a private matter. So they told us, recollections may vary and all that, and was never discussed privately. So listen, people can say, I've seen all sorts of op-eds like, it wasn't racism. You can talk about the colour of a child's skin. Of course you can. You can question if they're going to have big ears or light or dark skin. That's all very normal. It was the concerns, and that part of it's never been addressed. Okay. The question then is, if there's someone...
As if the concern would increase according to the darkness of the skin. Okay, you're right. That hasn't been properly reflected, has it?
And if there are people that really had concerns, and that was obviously Meghan's belief at the time, what does that mean towards the attitudes of those members of the royal family to our very multiracial society, to the predominantly black and brown Commonwealth? The message it sends out is appalling, and it frustrates me that no one ever wants to have that conversation. Even the nuances within it, I hate the fact that it's the royal racist, this sort of lazy leaning on the alliteration of the words, when the reality is no one ever said it was racism. It was called out as problematic, that it was concerning, that it was unconscious bias.
Yes. Insensitive as much as anything else, as much as more insensitive than offensive, in fact, just not realising how other people respond. What do you say, though, to people who just say there's no earthly way the names could have ended up in the Dutch translation of the book without the author knowing anything about it or doing anything about it?
I can't read Dutch.
You'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as the world's biggest podcasts, including full disclosure, pause and rewind live radio on Global Player, where you're always in control. Download for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
You'll tell me when the mics are off, won't you?
Chris Packham.
There you go. No special privileges
it was like
for me.
Ian Dale interviewing Nadine Dorries again, wasn't it? Dean 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 Dorries again, wasn't